Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.
Наші
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and welcome back to day 702 of the news of the war in Ukraine. Of course, we're going to be covering the past 48 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine, but most importantly tonight, we have several big things to cover. Starting off with a major Russian training base in the town of Ilovaisk getting hit by a Ukrainian HIMARS attack today, and not only that, we also got some additional information on what is going on in St. Petersburg, what the St. Petersburg doing. We also have a bunch of big news coming from Crimea, particularly from United 24, and not only that, we have some very interesting frontline footage today taken by the Ukrainian SSO as they've been involved in their frontline operations to try and push the Russians back in a small counteroffensive. It has been a very big 48 hours, and not only that, it has been an incredibly high loss rate over the past 48 hours as well. But moving on into our first bits of news, here in the town of Ilovaisk, we got to see that the Russian attacks ended up not doing all too well. It appears that a Russian facility here, if you want to call it that, ended up getting stricken by a HIMARS missile, and we were also able to get confirmation from the Russian side that this led to the loss of nearly 25 Russian soldiers in a single HIMARS strike. It is pretty wild to see that the Ukrainians were once again able to use the M142 HIMARS to such a great effectiveness, and not only that, were able to cause such a serious amount of damage to the Russian forces here. To give you all a little bit of background while we watch the clip, from what we understand, this Russian training ground, if you want to call it that, was being used to try and train Russian soldiers on the use of FPV drones near to the front lines. Apparently this training is not conducted inside the Russian Federation. It is actually conducted almost like an on-the-job training site, just a couple of dozen miles away from the front, and once these soldiers are trained in drone warfare, they are then sent to the front to join their unit. But we can see our Ukrainian spotter drone here looking down into the training field, and we can see some kind of a compound here, and we also can see several things that are kind of interesting to observe. One, we can see the small trench work over here, which I'm guessing is their target for the drones, possibly, so that way they can train on what it would look like to try and hit a trench. We can also see some kind of a small outhouse building right here, more so like a farm shed, and then up here we can see what appears to kind of be like containers and a Scooby-Doo van in the middle of them all. And we can see now that the little the little cargo compartment area that I was just talking about with a Scooby-Doo van has clearly been hit dead on by a HIMARS. From what we understand, there were 24 Russian soldiers that were killed instantaneously when the HIMARS hit. Also, we have additional numbers a little bit later on that the Russians put out, speaking about the damage to the base, the amount dead, and how many Russian soldiers really were at the base. Also, if y'all want to help me with spotting bots and taking them out, make sure to give the name of the bot so that way I can find them and take them out of the chat. But beyond that, we did get that video from the Ukrainian spotter drone, which, by the way, was incredibly far behind the lines. And not only that, we also got a confirmation from Russian forces confirming that the attack had been conducted, was in fact successful, and had led to a very high loss of Russian forces. This is the confirmation that we got right here. This is, of course, the translated Telegram post from the Russian military, or the unit that was running the training camp, confirming the dead and also wounded, and also the amount of people who were on the base at that time. This is what the Telegram said. Donetsk People's Republic, Russia. Once again confirming that this is in Ilovaisk. Ukrainian Armed Forces HIMARS MLRS strike on a concentration of UAV operators. The blow from the fighters' words was possible for the following reason. The head of the courses of the Doomsday Project, Sudoplatov, with the call sign censored, sent out without any verification through a bot to strangers the coordinates of where to come for training. The HIMARS have arrived. They're all dead. So basically what the middle part is saying is that there was apparently a little bit of an OPSEC violation that led to the death of all these Russians. You see, what happened is that a lot like the Ukrainians have been doing, the Russians are pretty much sending out the DMs over Discord, but they're using something less secure even than a Discord. Apparently, this was sent off as almost a public ping. It was picked up on the Ukrainian side, which pretty much gave the exact coordinates as to where that ping was sent out, which was dead on the base, and it also gave the address to the base as well for any soldiers that were coming for drone training. And then the Ukrainians just sent out the spotter drone, lined up the HIMARS missile, and struck it dead on. But moving on from that, the rest of the message says, now the management of the Sudoplatov project is trying to hush up the situation and appoint the last of the dead. And this situation is not unique. No one else was hit at the training ground, although there were more than 150 people there. So this is once again confirming that the base was hit, and the damage was apparently pretty significant from what we understand. And of course, this would seem like a bit of a Russian blunder. In fact, this would be a massive Russian blunder, very similar to the kind that got several generals of the Russian armed forces killed way back at the beginning of the war in 2022. The lack of operational security, and just general screw-ups overall, things that you can't really afford to do in a war zone like Ukraine. And it appears that the Russians are filled with nothing but goofs and blunders, because literally at the exact same time that that base was getting smacked by a HIMARS missile, the Russians ended up rear-ending a car in Avdiivka and caused a serious auto accident, on kind of a smaller note. And also, thank you, Mad Jack. I was thinking about mentioning that here in a moment. But here is the car that has been absolutely plastered by the Euro 4320. And, you know, suffice it to say, the Russians aren't really doing a lot to help out the local population in reality, beyond just being a massive nuisance. But nevertheless, the Russians are the Russians. And you know the Russians would never be complete if it wasn't just for endless stupidity on their end, really, to be quite honest. We see some of the stupidest things going on time and time again behind the lines. And I'm actually going to take y'all to something I thought was the most stupid thing that I've seen behind the lines for quite a while. In the city of Mariupol, we saw that apparently there was a little bit of a situation that happened. You see, the city of Mariupol was leveled nearly 2 years ago in the Battle of Mariupol. Probably one of the most heavily fought over battles in Ukraine outside of Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and was one of the longest lasting as well. And from what we understand, it also had one of the highest casualty numbers, both for military and civilian. Beyond that, the city is pretty much a ruin, and it appears that the Google Street View is able to show some of the damage, but it's not really giving us a great idea of how damaged the city really is at this point. Beyond that, however, one thing I can say, and hopefully this is just a trust me bro on this, the city is wrecked, and it still is wrecked to this day. Although the Russians have been attempting to rebuild it and try and work on, you know, improving things here and there. But one thing that's really interesting is apparently the Russians are now making a real estate episode, like real estate series in Mariupol. I'm going to show y'all this because this is just bizarre. And so here's the clip. And I'll be reading the subtitles as well. How to buy an apartment in Mariupol. It is more profitable to invest in a ruin, to sell more expensive when it is restored. How to rent an apartment for business. How much does it cost? What apartments are offered for sale? And what does the price depend on? Here, broken buildings coexist with new and restored, and the real estate market is very non-standard. We have to study it in detail, and now we'll tell you everything. The secrets to Mariupol real estate. They left their homes in a hurry. There is very little surviving real estate. The demand is very high. While we were preparing the release, we saw so many interesting and even amazing things. This is nonsense. This is specifics. People cannot come back and see everything in their own state. The apartments are being restored, and the price immediately increases. I would guess that the price would immediately increase when you take a blown out apartment that looks like it had a night with a whole bunch of Taco Bell, and then you make it just somewhat livable with some cheap prefab. I'm pretty sure that the price does increase because, you know, I'm guessing no one wants to live in a shell. But anyways, the apartment costs 5 million rubles. Now that we have a number, let's go and take this over to our currency translator of ruble to US dollar, and let's find out how much an apartment really costs inside of Mariupol. And so, this apartment costs a whopping, and by the way, it's once again in the middle of a war zone, but according to the current currency translations, that apartment would cost a grand $55,700 US to live in. And I want you all to keep in mind, this is an apartment after all. Here in America, a trailer or something similar at this point, I think it's just a little bit over $50-something thousand, but this is an apartment in the middle of a war-torn city with absolutely no infrastructure, and it costs $55,700 to live there. I think, honestly, you could get a better value just, accepting defeat and giving up Ukraine back to the Ukrainians, but that's just me. The apartment costs $5 million. Business from Russian regions begins to enter. It will be priceless investment. Make a discount. And just showing us the beautiful war-torn city. I mean, it's glorious. It's the kind of squalor the Russians know. And let's see, this says Project Mirny. Project Mir? My name is Natalia. I work as a real estate agent in the city of Mariupol. And then it goes on into the actual episode. But pretty wild. And I would have to be quite honest with y'all, a little stupid when you think about it, that this is something that is really going on. And a little bit bizarre when you think about it, because, things like saying they left in a hurry, it's like, well, I assume so, because the city was getting bombed into oblivion by the Russian army. So, I'm not gonna lie, that is crazy to see that they made a real estate video about a war-torn, besieged city and acted like it was really cool to go into a broken-down home. I can't even put that into words, how crazy and messed up that is. I think y'all can get a pretty good idea of how messed up it is without me even having to really say much about it. But moving on from that, I want to really quickly take y'all to something that really piqued my interest today in St. Petersburg. We've gotten no news about this beyond the clip itself, so I can't really talk about it much more than what the video shows, but we did see that there was some kind of a large explosion again inside the city of Kaliningrad, and that's all we have. You can see it way off in the distance out there, that giant white smoke cloud. Beyond that, we have absolutely no idea what this is. It could be another Ukrainian attack, it could be anything. This was posted 14 hours ago, and we've gotten no additional information as to what that can be. But at the same time, we did see a white smoke trail, or more so a white plume from the explosion, which usually suggests that it's some kind of a solid propellant that has exploded inside of an ammunition site, or more so a piece of ammunition. And that may suggest that that was a Russian surface-to-air missile system that blew up, and that's why we're not really getting a lot of information about it. But beyond that, we still don't know much, and we're going to be waiting to see if we get any additional information on what's going on up there in St. Petersburg, because we all know what the real question is, what's St. Petersburg doing? But moving on from that, and all the way down into Ukraine itself, it's time for us to talk a little bit about that camp strike, and what the Russians have been doing behind the lines, because we kind of talked about everything the Russians have been doing today, from top to bottom, left to right, front and center, and it's very important to always discuss what are the Russians doing, especially with things like these camp attacks now occurring. Now, I did see some viewers saying this, and y'all are largely correct. Russian camps are more so of a fiction than a reality. This was one of the few camps that really existed, and is an incredibly small one that gives Russian infantrymen a very basic grasp on how to operate a drone. Usually, by and large, these camps never really exist, but here in this one instance, it did. But it still begs the question, what are the Russians going to do? Are they going to move these camps way a ways, maybe into Russia itself, to try and insulate them and protect them? Or are they going to keep the camps where they are? And a lot of y'all think that they will move the camps farther back, a lot like they moved their A-50 training, well, not training, but command posts way farther back, and instead of flying over the Sea of Azov, they're now flying over northern Krasnodar. I think that's probably going to be the case, because we've seen that they moved their supply lines way back behind the lines and all of their major logistics hubs, and I think they're probably going to start doing that with these training fields as well, especially considering the massive OPSEC violation they had that led to the destruction of this interesting little training camp. And sadly, I wasn't really able to geolocate it exactly around Ilovaisk, because the geography in that area doesn't really tend to lend itself much to geolocation. It's a pretty bland and flat area of Ukraine, but beyond that, I think they will be moving those sites a little bit further back. And speaking of something that got moved further back today, the Russian lines got moved back in a pretty interesting way today by the Ukrainian SSO. And this was a very interesting clip because sadly we do not know where it is, but this was a limited counterattack conducted today on the 26th of January by the SSO as they were storming Russian positions. We don't really know a lot more about this video beyond that, but it is still a very interesting video because we got to see the Ukrainian SSO, one of their higher trained and more elite units, in action on the lines. And sadly, I'm going to have to mute the music, but we can see the SSO moving forward. And we can see them continuing to advance a little bit away from the tree line and kind of in the open field. And I believe that's because they may have larger fire support behind them. We see them continuing to advance and firing on the tree line, laying down some covering fire as they continue to advance. We see them continuing to fire. It appears that they're all using M4s of some kind, a certain variant of the carbine. We don't know the exact one, but we can now see them advancing on into the trench. Now we're getting an aerial drone view of them as they continue to advance. And thank you, everyone, for pointing out that bot, as we watch the Ukrainians continuing to destroy the very things that those bots love, which are the Russians. And we can see them continuing to lay down some very heavy fire on the Russian entrenchment. And we can see this guy has a hollow sun sick. I like to see that the hollow sun is starting to be used a lot more in combat, because in prior years, before we saw the hollow sun getting a lot of combat experience, there was a lot of questions as to whether a hollow sun would survive frontline conditions compared to something like an EOTech. And we can see that while the hollow sun is a much cheaper option, somewhere around $350 to $300 compared to an EOTech, which is around $500 to $550, it is actually faring incredibly well and appears to be Ukraine's optic of choice, probably for the cost efficiency. We can see them continuing to fire down the trench, or more so this tree line. And we can also see that this is not a complete unit that uses nothing but M4s. We can actually see here that this guy has what appears to be an AKM, actually, interestingly enough. Not an AK-74, but an AKM firing a 7.62 cartridge. A 7.62 by 39 cartridge. We now see them throwing in some nades into this upcoming entrenchment that they're moving up into. And we now see them falling back after tossing in another nade, and it appears that there was an ammo cache in that thing because it is burning up hotter than someone who has a fever. But we can now see them reloading the M4 and taking some Russian prisoners. You see him say, "Hands behind your back, you're under arrest." Probably for public drunkenness and disorder. It's two things the Russians do very well, even on the front lines. And we now see them walking him down the muddy trench. And I believe on into a holding area. And now we can see the unit continuing to press forward and try and take more ground. The video clip ending there. Still, pretty nice to see, and I love to see that the Ukrainian SSO is continuing to do its work in trying to push the Russians back. We don't get to see that much. We usually rarely ever get to see Ukraine's most elite units in operation, like the Presidential Brigade, the Ukrainian SSO. Usually we see the higher-end units of the, well, more so the higher-end frontline units, like the 3rd Brigade, the 93rd, the 47th, and other units like those in these videos. It's very rare that we see the more reserved and very high-end and elite units, such as the Presidential Brigade or the SSO or the SBU in action. But nevertheless, it is nice to see that they were in action today and making sure to bring the war right to the Russians. It's almost like Amazon Prime, but Ukrainian and in the middle of a war. But moving on from that, we also got to see a small clip of a Caesar SPG in action. I believe this is actually the Danish variant of the Caesar SPG, but we can see them here setting it up. We can see the booms going on down into the ground and getting ready for the big boom. We now see the gun setting up, and it is ready to fire. We can see that that guy just got hit by the crane, and we see him demonstrating how the crane loads the ammo into the, I believe, the holster, and then prepares to then load the ammo into the breech. We now see it going through a simulated breech loading. And now we can see them setting it back up. And this appears to be a display for maybe some officers or visiting generals, showing them how the Caesar SPG operates, specifically the Danish variant. And I gotta say, really cool to see the thing just operating without actually having to fire. Just really neat to see the mechanical functions of it. It's always great to see. But moving on from that and into our next bit of Location Unknown news, we got to see that one Ukrainian soldier went home very lucky. This thing is really cool. This is an AS Val. And usually, many of you all know that I crap on Russian weaponry, and nowadays I actually crap on it a little less because I've started to turn and become a little bit of a believer in the AK-74 platform. It is actually a pretty decent rifle if you ever get your hands on one and are able to shoot it. But there are a couple of Russian oddities that have come out. Yeah, really, honestly, they're Soviet oddities, but we'll call them Russian, that have come out over the decades that are pretty interesting, and from what we know, they are pretty cool. I mean, I'm not going to lie, they are pretty neat. And one of them is the AS Val. The AS Val and the VSS Veneras, which you can see right here, which have very similar design processes behind them, are a Russian integrated suppressor rifle. It is kind of a submachine gun at the same time. I believe it fires a 9x39mm cartridge, and let me check that. Let's see. It is a 9x39mm cartridge, and it's a pretty interesting and unique rifle. Very few of these things were actually produced. Kind of very similar to the AN-94. It was supposed to be introduced to service in much greater numbers, and due to massive costs for the rifle per unit, they were introduced into much more limited numbers. But this one here at the top, I believe is the Veneras, and the bottom one's the Val. But this one is very interesting because it has a PSO scope mounted to it, which is a 4x magnification optic that looks like it would be a lot more than that, because just to put that into perspective, this PSO scope on top of the Ventress actually gives the same amount of magnification as a much smaller ACOG would. And the ACOG is one of the primary sights or optics that is given to the US Army for them to use in standard infantry roles. So it's a little interesting to see a scope that big and then just think, oh, it's not actually that powerful. It's about the same power as an ACOG, which is what an infantryman would get here in the US military. But beyond that, these rifles, I cannot stress enough, are insanely rare. These things are almost non-existent. You rarely ever see them, and the few forces that use them are the Spetsnaz, and in very rare instances, the VDV. But usually it's the Spetsnaz of the Russian Federation that get the neatest of equipment, or the coolest stuff. And there's another thing, some of y'all may have seen this on a huge channel on YouTube called Grand Thumb, but there's another incredibly rare gun that we have not even seen, because it's so rare, in frontline service in Ukraine yet, from what we've known. And that is the AN-94. You can actually see the AN-94 right here. This is a very unique rifle as well, in the fact that this thing has a, I think it's called like a hyperfire mode, where if you switch it to hyperfire, it's in automatic, but when you first pull the trigger, it fires off 2 shots pretty much instantaneously, almost as a single shot. It's a very odd system. It's also mechanically way too complex. It's like the Russians tried and get the HK mindset in this thing, and that's why it never ended up catching on. It was way too expensive to produce. It was also very finicky in real combat conditions, but overall, once again, a very bizarre rifle. This thing was actually supposed to replace the AK-74 way back at the turn of the millennia, but it never did. It ended up just becoming this weird oddity that's rarely used by the Spetsnaz, and oddly enough, I think it's Uzbekistan owns 60 of these things, and the IRA in Ireland owns, I think, supposedly 20 of these. But beyond that, a really odd rifle, much like the VSS Ventress and the Val, but what we have right here is one of these rare examples. This is a Val that was captured by a Ukrainian soldier and brought back. He got to take some pictures of this, obviously, a little bit earlier on in the war. I think this would have been about the late summer of last year, but pretty unique. You'll rarely ever see one of these things really anywhere around the world, in fact, even on the front lines. And The fact that this Ukrainian has one is pretty freaking wild. Sadly, however, like the caption said, there is no more ammunition for this. 9x39 is very hard to find, and it's very rarely produced because there's so few rifles that actually use it in military service. There isn't a major demand for 9x39mm cartridges in the Russian Federation. So finding ammo for this thing at all is pretty tough. In fact, it's impossible really outside of Russia. But still, a really unique and bizarre rifle, and one of the times that the Russians tried to way outdo the West. And in a way, they almost did, and then it was so expensive that they couldn't produce these things in mass. So, it just is what it is. It's a lot like the T-14 Armata or the Su-57. It technically is pretty okay. Well, actually, the Su-57 just sucks, but the T-14 Armata, at least on paper, would be a pretty good tank, but the Russians simply don't have the money because they are broke as hell. But anyways, moving on from that interesting little bit of location unknown news and on into our next one, we also got to see a very odd thing. Some of y'all asked the question, and I actually haven't had a good answer to this for a while. How in the world do the Ukrainians get their ammo for the drone bomblets? I found out that they boil mortar rounds, and then they just drain out the high explosive in the mortar rounds, and that's how they get the explosives. I'll just show it to you.
Я вам скажу.
I'm gonna have to mute the music, but here they are boiling mortar rounds. Like literally boiling them in a pot, and now they're going to pull them out. And over here in these soda cans, they're then going to pour out the high explosive. I'm not even making this stuff. You can't make this stuff up. Anyone want a beer? That's it, because I have a feeling that's going to pack a bit of a punch. When you go to the bar in Ukraine, you say, I want something a little bit punchy to drink. You get one of these. Have you ever wanted to sit there and literally blow your ass out after drinking a lot of alcohol in a single night? Well, then try yourself a Ukrainian mortar round. These things are beers that you can buy at your local bar, and it is literally made of mortar round high explosive filler. Sit there and drink this and blow your guts out for the rest of humanity. It's much like the name speaks. Guts, glory, mortar. But I gotta say, wild stuff. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. It seems very dangerous, but mad respect for doing that. But beyond that, we got to see a T-80BVM also getting destroyed by a Ukrainian drone. Mind you, the T-80BVM is the most advanced variant of the T-80 series main battle tank that the Russians can field on the front lines at the moment. And they were able to lose one today. And I gotta tell y'all, call this drone operator Tiger Woods, because this is a hole-in-one. This was a masterpiece. The explosive reactive tiles, the contact 5 tiles on the turret, are actually covering the driver's hatch mostly, so there's only a third of that hatch visible. And somehow that drone operator bounced it right off the very lip of the hatch and straight into the tank. And by the way, just to add even more craziness to it, you can see that the little thermobaric grenade here pops into the hatch and into the turret compartment, and right on top of the ammunition inside of the tank. Here comes the explosion. We see it blow up, and it immediately catches the ammo on fire, sending it into an inferno, and of course burning out everything in the tank within seconds. Well, you see the drone hanging out and waiting for probably a more exciting explosion in a minute. And there we have it. The tank is gone. And let's see here. I think the turret's gone. It is gone. The turret's over there. Sadly, we didn't get to see the toss. So if y'all want, you can rate the toss, but sadly, I don't think I will. I'm going to hold off because I couldn't even see the turret go flying. But beyond that, a very impressive drone bombing by the Ukrainians, and once again showing their great skill on the front lines. And so, with that, we are now moving on into the Russian casualty report. And we got to see that the numbers were very high over the past 24 hours, especially in the infantry numbers. They were incredibly high. And moving on into our first number, it is 990 Russian soldiers knocked out over the past 24 hours. An impressively high number, absolutely unbelievable, and bringing the total up to 380,600. It is a whopper of an infantry loss for a single day. And we're also seeing that they lost a pretty good amount of equipment in other categories. 16 armored personnel carriers, 20 supply trucks, 8 main battle tanks, 15 artillery pieces, 1 cruise missile, and 5 Bobcat skid steers. Overall, not a bad day at all. I'm pretty happy to see it, and I love to know that the Ukrainians are continuing to keep this up and continuing to knock out Russian forces as consistently as they possibly can. The Russians just don't learn, and that 990 Russian soldiers wiped out is pretty damn high. And of course, in CIA 8, I forgot how to actually say your name. I'm so sorry about that, but you've been around forever. He said 900 is close to the average these days, and it is. But that's what is really shocking, is that this is really almost an average nowadays of how many soldiers are lost per day. But nevertheless, it's absolutely wonderful to see numbers like that on an average, because it means that this war will hopefully be coming to an end sooner rather than later. But moving on from that news and on out of our our location unknowns and on into our front line. Well, actually, I forgot. There's a little bit of news in Belgorod before we move to those front lines. We got to see that the Freedom of Russia Legion hit an excavator today. We actually got to see one of the special equipment vehicles getting blown up. So, here it is. There's the excavator, and, you know, usually you think of an excavator as like a caterpillar excavator, but apparently the Russians will just put a crane onto the back of a normal truck, and that's their excavator, but they still blew it up. And we can see the truck right there. It's kind of just chilling. And the Ukrainians are about to make sure that this thing chills in the fine cold air of the Russian border area. There goes the drone hitting right behind the cab. And that's the end of the clip. But beautiful to see. And I love to see that kind of stuff. Y'all know I do. Because with every special equipment vehicle getting destroyed, it means that the Russians can build less trenches, less defensive fortifications over an area that would be needed, like, for example, in the Kherson area right now. And that means the Ukrainians may be able to get an upper hand advantage. Or the Russians will try to prepare, but they will not be able to prepare their defenses enough, and the Ukrainians will be able to manage a breakthrough. Hopefully. But with that, that's the news we had in the area around Belgorod. And now it is time for us to move on into the area of northern Ukraine. But really quickly, I thought I would show y'all something very interesting. Did y'all know that Kharkiv, in Soviet history, was actually the major place where most Soviet main battle tanks were produced. And they were produced at a factory called the Kharkiv Tractor Factory. The Kharkiv Tractor Factory is actually pretty unique and very interesting. I think I might be able to try and find it here, because it's the HTZ, I believe it's pronounced. I know I butchered that, though. But I'm trying to find it and see where it is, because it is actually a massive landmark inside of the city. And I think this might be it right here. But let me type it in. Kharkiv Tractor Factory. And here we go. And let's see where the marker puts us. Let's see here. All the way out here. I don't think that's the tractor factory. I don't know why we can't find it, because usually it used to be on Google Maps pretty easily. I know some people are about to say OPSEC, but even the Russians know where the Kharkiv Tractor Factory is. I mean, it's a literal landmark that's been around since Soviet times. But beyond that, what's very interesting about this tractor plant is that it was the one to produce the higher-end Soviet tanks that we actually see both sides using today. The Kharkiv tractor plant produced T-64s and T-80s. There was a tractor plant, and by the way, this is another weird thing to explain. All tank factories in Russia are called tractor plants. The reason why is because way back at the beginning of the Soviet Union, when they started to try and produce tanks, they literally just took tractor plants and then they just converted them into building tanks, and then it just stayed like that throughout the rest of history. So they started off as a tractor plant, they never changed the names, and while it's a literal tank factory, it's just called a tractor plant. But beyond that, there is another one deep into Russia that ended up producing the T-72. And out of those three tanks, the T-64, the T-72, and the T-80, the T-72 is actually considered to be the worst of them. And that was the one that was brought forward by a Russian design bureau. And this is, and I don't mean to just like tell you all this massive rabbit hole here, but it's something very interesting about the war that still impacts both sides to this day, is that Kharkiv was largely a Ukrainian-led tractor plant inside of the Soviet Union. And therefore, a lot of its designers were Ukrainian. And the Ukrainian designers actually put more of an emphasis on the quality of the tank, more so than the quantity or the ruggedness of the tank. kind of like in America, in case you know about arms procurement here in America, it's kind of like the old gang or whatever they called them here in America. I think they were called the Reformists, I think is what they were called. But beyond that, they designed this thing called the T-64. And I'll pull this up for y'all real quick, because the T-64 is kind of what kicked everything off. So here it is. This is actually a Ukrainian T-64BV. But when this thing was introduced, it was actually considered to be a pretty damn good tank by really every standard. The tank was a lot more reliable. It was a lot more intricate mechanically, but it was also a little bit more expensive. But still, at the time, this thing would have been going up against Chieftains and M60s from the United States. And when this thing went into service, I mean, it really was shaking the West to its core, especially the United States, because we looked at this thing and we said, that looks a little concerning, because once again, remember, at this moment, the T-72 was not a thing. The Russians were still using the T-62. And so we looked at this thing, we said, oh, that is a little concerning. That thing may actually outdo an M60 quite easily. We might need to start putting some development into our own main battle tanks and come up with a better one. And that's when we started to work on the main battle tank program with the Germans, and then that would eventually lead to the Abrams. But a tank designer in Russia, and thank you, Christian Cruz, and everyone else who said this, because y'all are correct. It is the Chelyabinsk tractor plant inside of Chelyabinsk. The Russian designers there looked at the Ukrainian design, which was very good. I'm not going to lie. This is for its time, it was a very good tank. They looked at this and they went, those stupid Ukrainians, they don't know crap. They're stupid, they're backwards, they don't know squat. They don't need to make a high-end refined tank for the Soviet Union. No. They need to make a rugged, reliable, simple tank that doesn't have any of the modern features of a main battle tank in this time in history, but it can get the job done. And this is what led, and let me make sure to get a proper picture of this thing so that way I can show y'all what was really introduced. This is what led to the introduction of the T-72. And the T-72 is worse than the T-64 in every single way. The only thing that the T-72A beats out the T-64 in is mechanical simplicity, but it loses in every other regard. It does not have the same kind of imaging systems that the T-64 had. It does not have the same kind of accuracy even that the T-64 had, although it does share the same gun. For some reason, I've heard that the T-72 is slightly less inaccurate. Well, slightly more inaccurate, that's the best way to put it. The armor is lighter, and also this thing has a tendency, like y'all have seen, to blow up like a Roman candle, because all of the ammo is actually laid out in what's called a carousel right below the turret. So you see the round shape of the turret? Literally inside of the round shape of the turret is all the ammo in the tank. So if it gets hit, it blows up, it sends the turret sky high, it kills everyone in the tank instantly. It's a bad design. It is literally a terrible design. But what's funny, so the Soviet Union, of course, primarily led by the Russians, considering that they were the largest population group in the Soviet Union, ended up adopting the T-72 as the major, well, more so, the main service tank of the Russian, or the Soviet Union, instead of the T-64. But oddly enough, here's where some crazy crap comes in. The Soviet Union was not one entire, homogenous system is the best way to explain it. The republics that you saw, well, a lot of the countries you see today actually existed as Soviet republics. There was the Ukrainian Soviet Federative Republic, I believe, the USFR, I believe it was called. There was also the Belarusian Soviet Republic, all of the Baltic states, each one was a separate Soviet republic, and all of the Stand Series countries were as well. Every single one of them was a separate republic. So Ukraine actually went primarily with using these T-64s and later on the T-80s as their main battle tanks. And that has ended up giving them just a little bit of a slight advantage in the war today, because the Russians usually primarily used these. And T-64s are next to none in the Russian army. The only other thing that the Russians have in a decently high number are T-80s, because they actually ended up liking the T-80 a good bit, although it is a Ukrainian design. But the T-72 is what they primarily use, and the most common one that many of y'all have seen is this one, the T-72B3. Under all of this nice-looking armor, it is literally the exact same T-72A that was worse than the T-64 in literally every single way. But that's what the Russians use today, and in a way, the Russians' hatred or prejudice against the Ukrainians has ended up biting them in the ass decades later in the war that they're fighting against Ukraine, because they're largely using a a moderately inferior tank compared to what the Ukrainians were actually able to field at the very beginning of the war. And so just wanted to share that with y'all because it's an interesting story about the city of Kharkiv, and it's also a very interesting story about tank development and tank history within the later part of the USSR. But anyways, it is time for us to move on into that northern front line and start looking at what the Ukrainians and the Russians have been able to pull off over the past 24 hours, and really the past 48 hours as a whole. But, of course, I have to make sure that I talk. And also, one second, Alexander Loray said something I'm going to have to check in on. He said that the Kharkiv tractor plant did not produce tanks. So let me go pull up the Kharkiv tractor plant, and let me double check. And let's see here. Hang on. Let me make sure. Hang on. So, hold up, everyone. I gotta go figure this out now, because the story went... Let's see. It's a Soviet tank. So, here's the thing. And maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if I am wrong, Alexander, but this says it's manufactured in Kharkiv. But let me go through. Let's see. It was conceived at the Kharkiv Morzov Machine Building Design Bureau. And let's see here. Let's move on. So it was designed in Kharkiv. Was it produced in Kharkiv? Let's see. Let's see. It was tested at Kubinka, which is also in Ukraine. What the hell? I'm wrong there. It's Moscow. Sorry, everyone. But let's see. So it was not tested there. And here's the T-64A. But where the hell were these things built? I've got to know. Let's see. Insufficient against the production done in 3 factories. Malyshev in Kharkiv. So it was not the Kharkiv tractor plant that built the tanks in Kharkiv. It was in Kharkiv, but it was from the Malyshev plant in Kharkiv. So incorrect there. And thank you for pointing that out. But nevertheless... Still produced in Kharkiv, still a Ukrainian design, and ended up being beat out by the T-72. But thank you for correcting me on that, because that is a big historical inaccuracy. Wrong plant entirely. But moving on from that, and on into our frontline news, it is time for us to start talking about what's been going on out here. But most importantly, before we do, I have to thank Avdiivka for throwing in a $100 super chat without a comment. Now you gotta thank you for the massive support and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you, Avdiivka, make it possible. Your support is huge, and you didn't even throw in a comment. So I'm gonna leave it at that, but thank you so much once again, and thank you for being an old guard of the Lee Spring Army. And moving on from that and into our next one, we also got a 50 from Gary Robbins, a channel legend through and through. And he said, I think that it is time to contact Congress and urge them to provide arms for Ukraine. And I'd agree. If y'all want, contact your representatives, your senators, just write them a letter and let them know that you want support to Ukraine to continue. I don't know if they'll listen, but I'm sure if enough people write letters in each constituency, they probably will listen. And so I'd certainly agree with you with that, 100%, Gary. I think that folks should be writing their representatives and letting them know how important support to Ukraine is to them. And that's what y'all's votes are really, like, resting on, if that's the most important thing y'all are thinking about in this next election cycle. So with that, thank you so much for the massive amount of support, Gary, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to our last super chat of this segment, which is a 50 from Charles Hazlitt, his first super chat ever. And actually, funnily enough, I feel like I've heard your name before in the super chat, but YouTube is saying that this is your first. And so if this is your first, thank you. And if it's not your first, still thank you. But beyond that, Charles Hazlitt said, thank you, Matt. Thank you and Matt for all you've done for Ukraine and the LSA. And thank you so much, Charles, for the support and helping this channel to keep running. It means a lot to me that so many people have enjoyed what the channel has been able to do for Ukraine, and I got to thank you greatly for helping this channel to keep running. If it wasn't for folks like you who supported it, I wouldn't be able to do this night after night, day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. And I got to thank every single one of y'all who continue to support the channel, because it's only through y'all's kindness and generosity that I'm able to keep this thing on air. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you so much once again. And sorry if it sounds like I'm like gritting my teeth every once in a while, because for some reason tonight I've smacked my teeth into each other several times, and it hurts. That's update, it hurts. But nevertheless, thank you so much for the support, Charles Hazlitt, and helping the channel to keep rolling, and I hope I was able to address that as best I could. And with that, it is now time to move out of that question segment, but thank you to all three of y'all once again for support and helping this channel to keep rolling. And we are now going to be moving on into that frontline news, specifically into the northern area near Vilshana, where we got to see the 92nd Achilles at work with their heavy drones. Check it out.
Это лучшая работа в мире.
See them getting into the back of a BMP here. And we can see them whipping out the biggins. These things are chunky. Pretty damn big. Pretty interesting to see. And I thought the video had lagged there, but luckily it didn't. And we now see the drones flying around. We can see the 92nd showing them spotting some Russians on the run, moving through their trenches. But of course, we can see them getting smacked all over. And we can see them hitting everything. BMP-3s, Russian infantry, more Russian infantry, Russian trenches. The dirt. We can see them dropping a Baba Yaga up on them. And oh my god, Baba Yaga did work. Here we can see the Russians trying to flee the field, but of course, to no avail. We can see them getting blasted by clusters, running around their BMPs, getting smacked in their BMPs, getting their asses beat. And we can see them just getting smacked around everywhere. And with that, that's the end of that little clip right there, but once again showing the 92nd doing a very good job. Also, really quick note again, if you want me to find the bots, it is better to not just say troll alert, it's also good to give me their names, so that way I can make sure to get them out of the live chat, because I can't look at the live chat all the time to see who may be the bot. I can only look over every once in a while to see someone say a bot alert, and I don't have an idea who the bot is. So help the enforcer to find the bots and crush them by giving their names and their home address. I'm just kidding, don't do that. But anyways, moving on from that and down into the area of Avdiivka, we also got to see a British FV-432 near the front lines. Now, these things are very rare to see near the front. They're the British equivalent of the M113 is the best way to describe them. But we can see them here moving around in the night sky. We can also see the back lit up brightly. And also you can see this round circle thing in the roof of the FV-432. And what that is a panel that can be removed, and you can end up setting up a, I believe it's a 60mm or an 81mm mortar in the back of this thing, and use it as a mobile mortar platform. I believe every FV-432 has that open, that upwards circular hatch that can be removed, so really all of them can become mobile mortar vehicles, which is a very nice thing. But with that, we can see our last picture here of all of them just resting on top of the FV-432, and what a beautiful look. And I gotta say, a really cool little thing. And so with that, we are now moving on from that little bit of news in the northeast and down towards the Bakhmut battlefield. I'm sure that Bakhmut has been active over the past 48 hours, and many things have changed. And absolutely nothing has changed, rather than more Russians are pushing up the lilies here in this area of the front line. We got to see in the northern area of Bakhmut that a Russian BMP was destroyed by a drone. Oh, and we can hear some nice copyrighted music. And here comes the BMP, driving around, doing its thing, chilling, grilling. And getting hit on the move. A pretty impressive shot. We see them dropping another bomblet. This one leading almost just right, but landing in front of the BMP, and it looks like it's still able to roll on a little bit. Although you can tell they're probably panicking down there. By the way, it's also a BMP-2. And also, Elmer, are you talking about the BRICS alliance trying to replace the U.S. dollar as a currency? I don't think BRICS is. I don't mean to sound smug at all by doing that, but BRICS is never going to create a standard currency that's going to replace the dollar. It is hardly an alliance, even economically. The Indians hate the Chinese. The Russians hardly have anything to do with the Indians. The South Africans have denounced the Russians for what they do, as well as China. I mean, it is hardly an alliance. And so I would say if they ever tried to create a currency, it would be pretty tough to do because no one really likes each other. And on top of that, while this BNP gets obliterated here by the last bomblet, the entire combined GDP of the entirety of BRICS is still less than the US. So it's very hard to back a standard currency like that because, simply put, there isn't even enough money or really economic activity to back that currency. And now we can see them coming back to the BMP, and this thing looks like it is going to come right off the bone, like a well-cooked rib at a barbecue. And what an outro. I almost got mesmerized by the outro there. I was like, dang, what an outro. And that is the end of the clip right there. But still, pretty wild to see. And also, Elmer said they're creating a new currency backed by gold. Now, that's something of a little bit of a misnomer in the public, that a currency backed by gold is a good currency. And I'll explain really quickly why that is not the case. There is not enough gold in the world to back a currency any longer. That is something that a lot of people are like, what the hell do you mean? You can't get, like with a banknote, you can't go to the bank and be like, yes, I'd like $1 worth of gold. It would be infeasible. If everyone in the country did that, there would be no way to really back it up with gold. So, of course, here in the United States, we moved off the gold standard in the 70s. We moved on to pretty much a faith-based system where the dollar just has a value because it's prescribed by the public. But something like that in China, or in Russia for that matter, or in India or South Africa and Brazil, imagine them trying to create a common currency backed by gold. That would be insane. And that means, what we're saying here is that if they created that currency, any citizen in any of those countries could go to the bank and exchange their cash, their paper cash, or really their digital cash, for gold. I don't think they would even have enough gold to back a currency like that. So it is, honestly, to me, nothing more than myth. That's why every country in the world pretty much has moved away from a gold standard, because there's really no way anymore to feasibly back a currency with gold. But still, with that, just wanted to cover that for a quick minute, because everyone always acts like BRICS is a giant boogeyman, but when you really look at BRICS, it's hardly an alliance. In fact, I would say it's not an alliance. It's more so just like a friendship group. And on top of that, they hardly are an economic power of the world. If you ever hear that they are the majority of the world's GDP, that is outright ludicrous. And I'm going to go through this and just explain why. So, US GDP is $23.3 trillion. BRICS GDP is, let's see, the BRICS block, let's see, what is the GDP of the BRICS? Let's see, Visual Capitalist, which is run by the Chinese, very nice. So we have Statista here. This is the best one I can get y'all, and this is a 2022 figure being compared to the 2021 figure of the U.S. economy. The United States of America, as a sole country, has a GDP in 2021 of $23.3 trillion US dollars. The entirety of the BRICS alliance, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have a combined GDP of $25.8 trillion. That is literally just about $1 trillion more than the United States, and it takes a combination of 5 countries to be able to try and create that number. Now, that is pretty concerning. Oh my god. It is an economic alliance that has the economic power a little bit larger than America. But here's the problem with that. That is not factoring in the European Union's GDP, which is around an additional $19.35 trillion on top of the US GDP of $23 trillion. And then it's also not adding in the UK, which is separate from the European Union now, and has a GDP of approximately, I believe, $2.7 trillion. Let me check that UK GDP. Actually, it's actually doing quite good for itself. It's now up to $3.1 trillion. So if you add them all together, which of course I'm not that good at math, that means that the entire Western world, just Europe and the United States combined, not including Canada or any of the Western aligned nations in the East Pacific, like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea, which is probably another cumulative $10 trillion. You're looking at an economic powerhouse that is backed by the US dollar that beats out BRICS by at least a factor of 2.5. So there is never going to be a time in the world where BRICS currency, if it ever exists, is going to beat a US dollar. Not here in the near future. Maybe way down the line in hundreds of years, it may, but here in the near future, it never will. And that's just trying to give a quick look at the GDP that is backed by the dollar versus the GDP that would be backed by this goofy BRICS currency if it ever did exist. But with that, moving on into our next clip in Bakhmut, because that's where we were, we got to see the Omega unit finding and destroying a Russian BMP. Another one, as a matter of fact. This isn't the first one, this is the second one. And here it comes, right down on top of the BMP-2, and we can even see the Orki highlighted on top of it. And bada boom. Oh, wait a minute, it missed. It's flying over again. We got a second flyover here. Or it hit and it just clipped to the... No, here it comes again. This is an entire column on the move, actually. Ooh, little fireworks. Hey, that's it. And it's knocked out. Beautiful. That's the end of the little clip right there. But wonderful to see the Omega unit knocking out a BMP-2 and even giving us a little bit of fireworks to go with it. Moving on from that and on into our last clip in Bakhmut. This is something that actually is slightly concerning to me, and I'm sure y'all will see why. This is the Ukrainian M109 firing a round at the Russians. Here's the clip. What you've just seen was a critical ammo failure. Or more so, probably, because I just completely misstated what it was really supposed to be, that is a critical barrel failure right there from being completely worn out from continuous firing and the barrel not being replaced. The barrel literally evaporates pretty much when the round is fired. That's what you're seeing right there. This is something a little concerning because not only can it cause a very high amount of damage to the M109, but also it's showing that once again, like many other Western systems, apparently the background logistics to maintain Western vehicles that have been donated to Ukraine may be non-existent. So the Ukrainians are pushing a lot of Western vehicles to the point of critical failure, a lot like this one. Hopefully something can be done where this can be fixed or fixed for other SPGs that have not had this fate, but that is a pretty serious thing to see, and I think that is certainly a wake-up call that the US doesn't need to focus on just sending new stuff to Ukraine. We need to focus on maintaining the old stuff that is already there. But that was a pretty serious explosion if we've ever seen one. But moving on from that, and out of the Bakhmut battlefield, it's time for us to get on down into Avdiivka. The front lines have shifted a little bit over the past 24 hours, but when I mean a little, I mean literally a little. It only shifted up here in the northern area. That was the only shift we saw. About a half a field retaken by Ukraine, but beyond that, the rest of the front lines have not moved a single inch. It appears that the Ukrainians are holding their ground very well in the area, and they're still managing to conduct a very effective defense, mostly because they are using the most cutting-edge technology they can come up with to try and defend the area. We can see the Wally mine layer laying out drones in the Avdiivka area, so that way the Ukrainian sappers don't have to put themselves in harm's way, but they're also able to create minefields that will slow Russian advances here in the future. We hear the sound of artillery in the distance as Wally goes out to go lay out these mines. And we can see that they're just attached by a giant rope. And there they go, one after the other. You're right behind Wally. Go, Wally. It's like watching mom bring her children to school. It's like watching Chris's mom bring all the children she had to school. And I gotta tell you, none of them have the same dad. And there they go. That's it. So that they see in the clip, but very interesting to watch. And great to know the Ukrainians are trying to use their remote drones to lay out the mines so that way the sappers aren't in harm's way. Moving on from that and into the area of Kamyanka, we also got to see some of the Russian losses that have been building up in the area. Here's a bunch of BMPs rotting in the snow. Here's a whole bunch of other BMPs rotting in the snow. Here's even more BMPs rotting in the snow. And last but not least, here's some MTLBs and I think one BMP rotting in the snow. I think overall we're getting a good picture here that there are a lot of BMPs on the eastern side of Avdiivka that are just simply rotting in the snow. And I gotta say, God bless the Ukrainian troops and the American artillery that is bringing them to victory, and also the American anti-tank equipment as well, because once you have the best, you can't settle for less. But moving on from that into our next clip near Avdiivka, we also got to see more Russian forces getting hit, but apparently we can't watch that now. So we're going to be moving on to our other clip in Avdiivka, where we saw the Ukrainians evacuating civilians from the city that are still there, crazily enough, after enduring a battle that has been going on since pretty much October.
Авіабомби зруйнувала повністю під'їзд. Отак зараз виглядають квартири.
No politics, folks. I don't want to hear who you want for president, because it doesn't matter. Thank you very much for hearing me out. Thank you for my TED Talk.
Чути активні бої поруч. Зараз будемо евакуювати жінку, чоловіка та її двох.
And we see our Ukrainian first responders, or more so evacuation teams, getting into the city and trying to get folks out.
Та повезуть прямиком до міста Харків.
Put an LSA in the chat if you like the no politics rule. But we hear firefights going on not that far away as they're trying to evacuate these citizens.
Вивозили людей з цього будинку. Було потрапляння ворожої авіабомби. Люди з цієї вулиці все активніше і активніше починають збирати речі і виїжджати до більш безпечних місць.
Не видно, нет? Прилетело, не видно?
Now you see the civilians getting loaded into the back, getting ready to go.
Вивозимо.
See them getting out this beautiful German Shepherd. Look at that. Wow, what a German Shepherd. This thing is eating like raw steaks every day. This thing is beautiful. I love that German Shepherd. That's a glorious German Shepherd.
Амур. Амур.
Oh, that is a beautiful
Були на
dog.
локацію, яку
And two of them! Impressive.
надали нашим партнерам. Вони вже прямують на цю локацію. Зараз будемо передавати людей та таких песиків великих.
See them loading them in. And that's the end of that clip, but showing the efforts that the Ukrainian police are going through to try and get these citizens out. Very heroic effort, and great to know that the Ukrainians are always working tirelessly to try and ensure the safety of their citizens as best as they possibly can. Moving on from that, and a little bit behind the lines, we got to see a Bradley passing by. And y'all know I love to see American equipment passing by. It's beautiful stuff. And we can see another one right up here, too, on the side of the road. But here comes this one. A Bradley with the brought armor add-ons. Oh, beautiful. A beautiful one. And wait a minute, does it have toes? I think it does. I think that thing actually had toes on it. Let me see this guy in absolute awe. He's like, oh, beautiful. And I would be too. Those things are amazing. And hey, you know what? Speaking of which, y'all, you know what's crazy? Is that a few weeks ago, when I had some free time, I went to the range out in Talladega. It's called the Civilian Marksmanship Program. It's a 600-yard range. And when I was coming back, I actually thought that I had left behind my debit card at the range. So I pulled over at a gas station to check my car really quickly to see if I had dropped it anywhere, and I didn't see it anywhere. So I looked up, and in the parking lot of this gas station, it was kind of like a truck rest stop as well as a gas station, there was an M109 A6 Paladin on a truck bed being transported somewhere in the country. I mean, you know, it probably was to the Anniston Army Depot, to be honest, but to show y'all what that looks like, that's what this is. And that's also the kind of Paladin that we sent to Ukraine. And that was also the one that we saw that had the critical barrel failure in Bakhmut just a few clips ago. But still, just wanted to show y'all that because I think they're really beautiful looking SPGs. I mean, I don't think anyone can disagree. These things look really cool. But anyways, moving on from that, just wanted to share that little story with y'all, and also a little follow through. I did find the debit card. It was literally in my cup holder. For some reason, I put it there, and I completely forgot. But moving on from that and down into Marinka, we got to see the 67th Brigade near the front lines with an MG3. What a treat. What a treat. I'm glad I stayed up for this. This is a treat. And man, these things are beautiful. I mean, you know, you can say whatever you want about the MG42 and all that, you know, oh, yada, yada. But this thing is really cool. I love to see the MG3s. They're beautiful pieces and just a really good machine gun. I mean, it's still in service today with the Italians and the Germans as the MG3. I mean, if you can make a machine gun that good that it served through a world war and still serves in a lot of militaries to the present day, you made a pretty damn good machine gun, no doubt about it. But we can also see another fella here who has some kind of an AR. And we can also see another guy with maybe an AT4. And then this last picture here, we can see the same guy with the same AR, but this time he put a wrap on it, and he's posing for the camera. But a really good looking AR, and of course, a beautiful looking MG3. Beautiful little thing. And also, JT said, who needs a wallet? Yeah, that's the thing. I have a wallet, but whenever I feel like, you know, maybe I'll get some fast food or something, I always leave the debit card in the cup holder. So that's why it was there. It's because I was thinking when I was leaving. And by the way, y'all, I know everyone hates to hear this, but of course I was exhausted and everything while I was shooting. I was just trying to go and have fun. But when I was driving back, apparently in my head I had thought at some point, I was like, oh, let me put the card in my cup holder so that way if I want to get some fast food, it's easy to reach. Instead of, you know, trying to finagle with my wallet and stuff as I'm driving around a drive-thru. So I put it in there, and then I just forgot about it. And that was literally like 5 minutes after I probably would have put it in there, because it wasn't that far from the range that I sat there and went, where the hell's my debit card? But anyways, moving on from the MG3, which is nice to see. It's time for us to move just a few miles further down and into Avdiivka, where we got to see a Russian tank get destroyed. And here it is. I'm not going to lie, y'all. This looks like a BMP-2. The caption said Russian tank. It's a BMP-2. It's got the 2A42 auto cannon, the widened turret for the 30mm, and all the hatches are open, showing the crew has long since bailed. Oh yeah, and everyone's saying, oh, that might get your car stolen. Nah, don't worry, don't worry. I only put it in the cup holder when I'm in the car. When I'm getting out of the car, of course, that thing's going back into my wallet. But when I'm in the car and I'm thinking, oh, I might get some fast food, then I put it in the cup holder. But it's never just sitting in the car. So any stalkers or weirdos that were starting to plan on robbing my car and stealing the debit card, it's never in there if I'm not in there. So, yeah, that's it. I hope that addresses that well, just in case y'all got concerned right there. And we can see the BMP-2 exploding, of course, the fuel compartment in the middle of the infantry bay, blowing up, and we can see it's burning down the BMP-2. Toasty. And that's the end of the clip, but always beautiful to see another BMP-2 roasting. Moving on from that, and down the lines, and let me make sure, yeah, moving on down the lines, and towards the area of Crimea, it's very important to talk about Ukraine's overall strategy because Ukraine still has its eye on retaking Crimea, probably one of the most important areas strategically for the Russian forces in the entirety of the war. And so let me take y'all here really quickly because United 24 had a lot to say about the battle for Crimea and how the Ukrainians have been fighting it so far. And so without further ado, here's the clip.
Crimea is an invulnerable military base the size of an entire peninsula. Or is it really? Did Putin manage to turn Crimea into a fortress as he strongly attempted to do? Well, shortly. Airports, hyped air defense systems, ships, and even the infamous Crimean Bridge. All of this is now under fire.
It's our legitimate target, according to the Geneva Conventions, current legislation, customs and traditions of warfare, and other norms of international laws. Quite a legitimate target.
We explain why the battle for Crimea is one of the main confrontations in the war in Ukraine. Crimea is a paradise-like resort peninsula in the Black Sea. Well, it used to be. In 2014, Russia occupied it and turned it into an enormous military base. With each passing year, the militarization of Crimea increased. The number of personnel and equipment has multiplied several times. The missile systems on the peninsula pose a threat to the entire region. For instance, the Bastion system is capable of striking any targets within a 600 kilometers range. Moreover, in Crimea, Russians deployed potential nuclear weapons carriers, such as the Kalibr and Iskander systems. In total, in 2023, journalists have identified 223 military facilities in Crimea. Ukraine needed to dislodge enemy military forces from Crimea, a region recognized by the international community as Ukrainian territory under occupation. However, achieving this was not easy. Here are ordinary winter days in Crimea. A military airfield where Su-24 bombers and Su-30 fighters are stationed is under attack. A radar station, an ammunition depot, and a command post responsible for coordinating air defense across the entire peninsula are on fire. British intelligence subsequently reported Ukrainian forces have been conducting a continued offensive campaign against Russian military facilities in occupied Crimea and have successfully struck several targets on the peninsula. A large landing ship of the Russian fleet, Novocherkassk, explodes. And this is what remains of it. In other words, nothing. These are just a few episodes from the battle for Crimea. The peninsula is a strategically important territory for the Russians, serving as a logistical hub, military deployment site, and the routes through which equipment and personnel move to the newly occupied territories. Therefore, it is not surprising that Ukrainians actively target enemy objects in Crimea and its vicinity, despite Russia's expectations being the opposite. Their plan for a full-scale invasion envisioned the rapid destruction of the Ukrainian Navy, with Crimea becoming a landing base for the capture of Odessa and Mykolaiv. However, Ukrainians managed to disperse their limited naval forces. In early spring 2022, they attempted to attack the enemy fleet with domestically developed Neptune missiles, which alarmed the Russians. But what definitively drove them away from Ukrainian shores happened on April 13, 2022. The Neptune struck and sank the flagship of the Russian fleet, the Moskva. This marked the first time a cruiser-class ship had been sunk in 40 years. Nevertheless, Crimea remained an enemy's base, and daily convoys of equipment, fuel, and soldiers passed through the Crimean Bridge coming from Russia. Until suddenly, boom! An explosion of a truck loaded with 21 tons of hexagen in TNT equivalent. This was not the last attack on the strategically important artery. On July 17, 2023, the Ukrainian military leadership did not get a good night's sleep. That night, they watched live as maritime drones of Security Service of Ukraine approached the Crimean Bridge, and it exploded once again.
From a military point of view, this is a disruption of a supply chain. When we first hit it last year, it took them more than 8 months to restore it. At that time, they were transporting all the munitions, military equipment and weapons by pontoon ferry. The bridge was not fully functional. Now, after the last attack, it is still being repaired.
This attack was one of the main results of the Ukrainian idea that fundamentally changed the tactics of naval battles. Within a few months, the security service of Ukraine significantly improved its drones. Now each drone was equipped with 3 communication systems. The explosive payload was increased to 850 kilograms of TNT, and the drone's body was now made of radar-invisible material. This project was named Sea Baby. It was these drones that detonated the Crimean Bridge in July 2023. But even before that, Sea Baby had executed the first ever massive attack by naval drones. At that time, they targeted the main base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, striking 4 military vessels, including the Admiral Makarov frigate. SBU designed and manufactured drones continued to tally up its list of targets. In essence, today Sea Baby transformed from a kamikaze drone to a modular platform capable of carrying various types of weaponry. This is far from the only maritime drone Ukrainians have. The 5.5-meter Magura from the main intelligence directorate successfully targeted the Russian patrol ship Sergei Kotov. A new modification of the Mamai drone manufactured by the SBU is the fastest vessel in the Black Sea, capable of reaching speeds up to 110 kilometers per hour. With 450 kilograms of explosives, it managed to inflict significant damage on the large landing ship Olenegorsk Gornyak and the Russian Ministry of Defense tanker SIG. All these attacks compelled the Russians to move most of their fleet away from Crimea. However, they kept returning, as only Sevastopol had the infrastructure for reloading ships carrying Kalibr missiles, and only Crimean shipyards were capable of repairing large vessels. It was precisely in these moments that Ukrainians caught the enemy and even managed to destroy the Rostov-on-Don submarine valued at $300 million while it was in the docks. The further it goes, the more losses Russia suffers in Crimea. Some losses are particularly crucial. Powerful explosions at the Russian airbase, 7 planes destroyed, 3 damaged. The Russian Patriot destroyed, an S-400 missile system worth $1.2 billion.
It was an explosion that eliminated an exemplary unit of Russian air defense systems. And what they wanted to sell abroad at a high price. I think now there will be much fewer buyers for such not very effective things that, however, burn well.
Within a few weeks, one more S-400 complex was destroyed by Security Service of Ukraine. Within a week, another strike, a missile attack on the headquarters of the entire Russian fleet. According to Ukrainian intelligence, dozens of enemy officers were eliminated. Strikes on the fleet and missile systems in Crimea allowed Ukrainians to independently restore the grain corridor that the Russians had tried to close. Starting August 2023, approximately 15 million tons of goods were transported through it.
There will be many surprises later. We are talking not only about the Crimean Bridge.
The Russians attempted to hinder the export of Ukrainian grain and to initiate an extensive missile terror. Additionally, Russian bombers drop anti-ship mines with special sensors into the shallowest parts of the sea, which explode when a ship passes over them. However, Ukrainian air defense systems started catching the enemy in the act. On the southern front alone, 3 Su-34 bombers were destroyed in a single day on December 22, 2023. Since 2014, the Russians have been transforming the once resort peninsula into a military base. After the full-scale invasion, Ukrainians began clearing military objects from out there. And they will keep on doing so until Crimea becomes peaceful, happy, and Ukrainian once again.
That's the end of that clip from United 24, a very interesting one, talking about the Ukrainian grand strategy against the Russian forces inside of Crimea, and giving us a little bit of a glimpse into what their overall idea or thinking is for the most part. But moving on from that and up into an area that has a lot to do with Crimea, which is the left bank of the Dnipro River, we saw a video come out. It's the only one that we've got, and it appears that fighting in this area has generally subsided, at least for a short while. But we saw that the 35th Marine Brigade was hunkering down while the Russians were shelling their, the town of Krynky. And here's the clip.
Броня, ебать! Ебать, ты ляжь, там стена отошла. Воно в боку. Воно, сука, в углу, ебать.
We see our soldiers here looking around in the darkness. We see a small fire down here in the basement, probably to keep them warm.
А, главное с мясом, курва, да?
А ну, вот. Тут є стрілка. Давай її сюди. Стрілку.
You see them still moving around inside this basement here, largely in the pitch black. It looks like one of them may be using a phone flashlight, and the video cuts out right there, but giving us a small look into the life of the 35th Marines that are still holding the city of Krynky against Russian heavy shelling. But beyond that, the Russians continue to hold, the Russians continue to try and push into Krynky, and the Ukrainians continue to hold their town as the Russians try and take it back. But with that, it is time for us to move up to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 702 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech.
I wish you good health, dear Ukraine.
We ain't having that. We're not having that. All right, here's the speech.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці і українки. Провів сьогодні ставку. Головне – це фронтова ситуація. Доповіді детальні, кожний напрямок, загалом наші оборонні операції та активні дії. Кожен в Україні знає, де зараз найбільш інтенсивно. Авдіївка, Мар'їнка, Куп'янський напрямок, південні напрямки. До кожного максимально увага. Проаналізували також на ставці усі питання щодо снарядів, заповнення дефіцитів, постачання у війська, домовленостей з партнерами і власного виробництва. Дуже важливо, українське виробництво зброї, снарядів демонструє позитивну динаміку. Я вдячний усім, хто залучений, кожному і кожній, хто працює заради наших власних можливостей в Україні. Окремо сьогодні обговорили захист нашої держави від російського повітряного терору і прикордонних міст, і наших фронтових позицій. Ми працюємо, щоб збільшити кількість систем ППО, відповідних боєприпасів для захисту від російських авіанальотів та ракетних ударів. У контролі у небі багато в чому відповідь щодо контролю на землі. Друге, за цей день провів нараду щодо нашої роботи з партнерами в Євросоюзі та відносини з державами-сусідами. Раціональність у відносинах – це пріоритет. І готуємо наші відповідні кроки. Третє. Нарада щодо фінансової ситуації, роботи податкової і податкових надходжень, звіт за минулий рік, пріоритети у цьому році. Головне для держави, усього нашого суспільства, щоб у кожного з українських підприємців були можливості для більш активної економічної роботи. А отже, і для того, щоб українські бюджети могли більше орієнтуватися на сили своєї економіки. Державні інституції, кожен з посадовців зобов'язані робити все можливе, щоб сприяти легальному білому бізнесу. Я вдячний усім нашим підприємцям, кожному і кожній в Україні, хто залишається в державі, зберігає свої підприємства і робочі місця. Достойні робочі місця в Україні, робота кожного підприємства, яке залишається в легальному полі – це одна з ключових основ української сили. Власне, сьогодні ми даємо старт заснуванню нового механізму комунікації з підприємцями і не лише з тими, хто найбільш помітний, засновуємо всеукраїнську економічну платформу, на якій буде представлений і малий бізнес, і середній, і великий, і різні регіони нашої держави. І інвестори, і релоковані підприємства зроблено в Україні. І це не просто бренд, це велика спільнота людей, мільйони українців і українок, які працюють на підприємствах. І це наші люди, які засновують підприємства, які створюють робочі місця для інших. Вся спільнота нашого бізнесу буде представлена на новій платформі уряд разом з Офісом, обласними державними адміністраціями, експертами має організувати роботу платформи. Головне завдання, щоб це був інструмент дієвої комунікації, щоб спілкування завжди підтримувалось операційними рішеннями, тим, що державні інституції роблять або змінюють, і тим, що створюють нову, нормальну історію відносин, зокрема, між правоохоронцями та підприємцями. Потребуємо більшу впевненість для бізнесу і більшу легальну білу економіку для України. Потребуємо більше українських виробництв, більше українського продукту різних галузей. І щойно підписав укази, які дозволять створити саме такий комунікаційний механізм – Раду з питань підприємництва, як це і визначено, зокрема, нещодавнім рішенням РНБО і всеукраїнської платформи для активізації підприємництва і нашого українського продукту. Я дякую усім, хто б'ється і працює заради України, усіх наших людей, нашого суспільства, в усьому його різноманітті. Я дякую кожному і кожній, хто розуміє, що лише постійне посилення України наближає завершення цієї війни, справедливе завершення нашою українською перемогою. Слава нашому народу! Слава Україні!
And Herom Slava. And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 702 of the war in Ukraine. And that begins a brand new segment of this stream. A fun, pioneering segment. The one where I get to talk to all of y'all. Probably the funnest segment in the stream, because I get to really talk about whatever. But, before we get into it, I gotta say, thank you to everyone who has been here tonight and has been watching. It means a lot to me. Not only that people enjoy the channel enough to help it to keep running, but it means a lot to me that so many people just enjoy the channel altogether to watch it each and every night. It blows me away that people watch this channel because, to be honest with y'all, I'm just being me. And it always just impresses me that people find that interesting enough as it is to hear me cover the news as I would cover it. I got to thank every single one of y'all for that. And I hope y'all stick around because once I get through the super chats, I'll be able to move on into the live chats. And I'll be able to address as many of them as I possibly can. I'll let y'all know when that's about to come around. Usually about 2 to 3 super chats before we get to the live chat segment. So that way y'all can start throwing them in and I can make sure to answer them. The premise of this channel, always, and I always want to remind y'all of this, is that it is entirely free to watch. Y'all do not have to throw in a single cent or a dime if y'all do not want to. Y'all only have to throw in support if you feel like you enjoy the channel enough that you would want to support it. Beyond that, y'all can just throw in live chats, hit the like button, and watch completely free. And there is absolutely no pressure beyond that. I just want y'all to be able to hear the news of what's going on in Ukraine, and beyond that, everything else is secondary. It's optional. Y'all don't even have to do it if you don't want to. But with that, it is time for us to move on into these amazing and interesting super chats. And moving on into our first one, we got, and let me make sure I'm starting from top to bottom, we got a 20 from Mr. Anderson. And the Mr. Anderson said, hope you feel rested. I'll add to the coffee fund. Please take a question from the chat and Slava Ukraini. And thank you, the Mr. Anderson, for the support and helping the channel to run. And yes, I am feeling well rested. In case of y'all are wondering, why was yesterday's show canceled? It was canceled because I was so exhausted, I passed out. Let's see, let me think. I don't even know how yesterday went. I was so exhausted. All right, so let me think it through. So the day before that, I was so tired, I was trying to read a book at law school, and I tried to close my eyes for just 5 minutes because I thought I'd feel better. I woke up an hour and a half later and was almost late to class. And then I came home after that, and I ended up passing out in the middle of working for about another hour, and then woke up and then ran that stream that night. That's why I sounded like I was so tired, is because I was literally collapsing from exhaustion nearly. So the next day, it was no better, and I had only gotten like 5 hours of sleep before that day, and was just flat out exhausted. And so I came home, I ate supper, and I was like, you know what, let me just go up to my bed really quickly, and maybe I can get in maybe like an hour of sleep, and maybe that'll make me feel better. And so I had about an hour of sleep. I woke up when the alarm sounded, and I was so exhausted, I couldn't even really get up out of bed. So then I used all of my remaining strength to make sure to put an announcement out on Twitter and the YouTube community page telling all of y'all I would not be running a show that night, and then I immediately fell back asleep. And by the way, that was at 6 o'clock in the afternoon when I fell asleep then, and I slept all the way until 8 o'clock next morning, literally without waking up. That's how exhausted I was, and so that's why the stream did not run yesterday. And so I hope that explains my absence, because I bet a lot of y'all were like, what happened? Did he get in a car wreck? You know, is he like having a breakdown? What's going on? No, I was literally just so exhausted. I pretty much collapsed from exhaustion and was not able to run the show. So with that, I hope that does address that part well, but I feel well rested now because I did get 14 hours straight of sleep, and it's good to know that I feel a little bit better because of that. But beyond that, thank you for adding to the coffee fund, because you're helping me to avoid sleep with a coffee fund. And I've got to make sure to avoid sleep, otherwise I won't be able to get up and do this each and every day. And so I will make sure to take a question from the chat. And of course, Slava Ukraini! And thank you, the Mr. Anderson, once again, for being concerned, wanting me to be better and do better, and thank you once again for helping this channel to run. And moving on into a live chat, and let's see here. Moving on into a live chat, let's see here. Let's see, I'm looking around. Marcia Tucker said, the polls? Sadly, I only ran one tonight. It's very hard for me to come up with polls in the middle of the stream these days, because I'm having to balance being a moderator and interacting with the live chat with also trying to make sure to keep a monologue going on the show and clicking through the right videos in the right sequence. It's a lot. So, and also I'm coming up with the polls pretty much on the fly, as well as what I'm doing on air, so it's all really tough to do. So sadly, I only was able to run one poll. But let's see here. Looking for a live chat. Sadly, I'm not really finding one. But let's see here. Hopefully there is, let's see here. I'm looking for, I'm trying to find a live chat. I'm so sorry, Mr. Anderson. I'm trying to find one, and I just, let's see, I cannot find one. I see a lot of y'all throwing in words of support to me, and I thank y'all for that. And also, by the way, y'all, don't slow down in the live chat, because there's only about 20 chats coming in a minute, which means that there's one coming in every 4 seconds or so. Y'all don't have to chill. Talk away, because the more y'all talk, the more stuff y'all give me to bounce off of and react to. And let's see. Reese Writing said, what do you think the chances of M60s in Ukraine? The main battle tank or the machine gun? Because the machine gun, highly likely. The M60 MBT, highly unlikely. The M60 MBT, by every stretch of the imagination, is largely outdated by this point. I don't think it would do well at all. Even the most modern iterations, like the M60A3, I think they would do quite poorly, because even in the Cold War, this wasn't really looked at as a good tank. Here's a picture of one, probably at Fort Knox. But these things were built as a stopgap. It's an upgrade of the M48 Patton, which was supposed to be a stopgap design in the first place until we got a better one, and then this thing ended up being in service from, I think, from like, including the M48, from about 1951 or hell, I think it was actually 1948 or 1949, all the way up until 1976 when the Abrams started to replace it. In service way longer than it was supposed to be. This thing is not a good tank, in my honest opinion. I don't think it's great. The armor wasn't that good. The gun was pretty good, though. It is the 105mm main gun that the Abrams would end up having as its first gun in the M1 and IP M1 variants before it got replaced by the 120mm Rheinmetall on the M1A1, the M1A1HC, and the M1A2 variants. But I'm just not really a big fan of this tank. There was a lot that could have been improved on. They tried to improve on it over the years, but it still is lacking a little bit, in my honest opinion. And it's, you know, it's all right, but it ain't a great tank, and I don't think we'll ever see them in Ukraine. I think I would much rather see Chieftains in Ukraine, even with the engine issues, the famous engine issues that the Chieftain had before we saw these things in Ukraine, because, you know, they're just meh. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, that live chat. And thank you so much to Mr. Anderson once again for sponsoring that live chat. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 20 from Jose Diaz, who threw in the Adeptus Mechanicus. Wait a minute, hang on. It was the... Yeah, I think it was the Adeptus Mechanicus. Hippo, and it says OP, and yes, OP, and I guess that thing knows the on the side, maybe. But nevertheless, thank you so much once again for support, Jose Diaz, and helping this channel to keep on running, because folks like you make this thing possible. And so with that, we're moving on to the next one, which is a $25 super chat from Susie Q. And Suzuki said, Enforcer, sometimes you amaze me. Ukraine, Ukraine, and then put in sunflowers. And thank you so much, Suzuki, for the support. Your 5th super chat in the history of this channel. And I got to thank you so much for saying that I sometimes amaze you, but sometimes I amaze myself. Taking days off is something I swear to never do, and I took one off yesterday. I am deeply ashamed, actually, because I always pride myself on being able to just power through everything like a machine, but taking a day off really amazed me too. But still, thank you so much for the support and enjoying this channel and helping it to keep running, because folks like you help to make this thing possible. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which was actually a live chat originally, but then Vance Hicks so greatly threw it in as a super chat and supported the channel and asked a question. And this is a question I was itching to answer. Vance Hicks threw in a 20, and thank you so much for that support. And he said, Enforcer, do you have any thoughts on the BMP versus the Bradley? Are they comparable war machines? It really depends on which iteration of the BMP we're talking about. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to compare the M2 Bradley to the most common and ubiquitous armored fighting vehicle of the Russian Federation, which would be the BMP-2. We're not going to be including the BMP-3 because it is not as numerous as the M2 Bradley. And let me make sure to get you all a number on this thing. Let's see here. Where in the world's the number produced? I'd be damned. They're not going to give me a number on that? You got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. But let's see. How many M2 Bradleys are there? Bradleys are there? Let's see. There's 4,641 M2 Bradleys. How many BMP-2s are there? About 20,000 BMP-2s. So you can see that the BMP-2 is a very, very numerous BMP. Way more numerous than the BMP-3. And let me make sure to go pull that up just to make sure. How many BMP-3s are there? And so there's approximately 2,000 BMP-3s. So you can see the BMP-2 is going to be a lot more common to come up against. So we're only going to compare the M2 Bradley to the BMP-2. So, first off, the BMP-2 does a very bad job at being an armored personnel carrier compared to the M2 Bradley or the M3 Bradley. The reason why is because the profile of the BMP-2 is very squatted. I mean, I guess that's the best way I could explain it. There is no room inside the infantry compartment. You are literally crawling around in there. It's such a small area. On top of that, the ergonomics of this thing are not that great because there's this extra little hatch here that's used by an infantryman if they hop in the BMP-2, but the original purpose of that hatch was to be the commander's position on the BMP-1, because the BMP-2 is, to put it lightly, quickly upgraded version of the BMP-1, because the BMP-1 was so bad in so many ways. The Soviet Union went, oh my god, we got to get rid of this thing, we got to get a better version of it, and then they made this. But beyond that, there are also several other things that the BMP-2 does not do well. For example, the BMP-2 only has night vision sights. The Bradleys have night vision and infrared, depending on the crew positions you're in. I believe the commander and the gunner both have infrared sights that they can look through, which is a massive improvement over the BMP. That means that the Bradley can see things when the BMP-2 may not be able to see things, and much easier. On top of that, the ergonomics for the infantry riding in the back of the Bradley, as well as for the crew, is much greater improved, meaning that crew fatigue is much less of an issue here in the Bradley than it would be in the BMP, which the crew compartments are very cramped. You can just tell simply because of how much space there is in between the commander and the gunner on a Bradley turret versus how much space there is in between the gunner and the commander on a BMP turret. There's a lot less space in between them. And when you actually burrow down into the turret and you're in there, they're almost shoulder to shoulder with each other, which you can imagine over time, that's a pretty uncomfortable position to be in. It's going to wear you down after a while. But beyond that, the Bradley and the BMP-2 are actually fairly similar in regards to firepower, at least at the surface with the main guns. The 25mm Bushmaster and the 30mm 2A42 autocannon are very similar to each other in rate of fire and armor penetration values for the shells that they're able to shoot. But the main difference in between the BMP and the Bradley is that the Bradley has a built-on dual-mounted tow launcher. Most BMP-2s do not have any kind of an anti-tank guided missile mounted onto them, although you can equip a BMP-2 with a Fago or a Concours ATGM. We just never see that in real life. We never seen that in practice. It appears that the Concours and the Fagos are used as detached ATGMs that are mounted onto tripods. We have very rarely, in fact, I don't think we've ever seen a BMP-2 with a mounted Concours ATGM on the vehicle. So we are assuming that a BMP-2 in Ukraine, used by the Russians, would not have an ATGM. So the Bradley would win in an overall firepower contest because it has the 2 tows that it can carry and fire along with the 25mm, while the BMP-2 only has the 30mm autocannon. Also, the crew survivability on a Bradley versus a BMP is oddly enough not that different. In fact, in that regard, there isn't much difference. The Bradleys and the BMPs both have paper-thin armor. They are armored personnel carriers, after all, or infantry fighting vehicles, if you want to call them that. And so the differences in crew survivability are going to be nil. If it gets hit in a certain spot, which for both of these vehicles, it's on the hull right below the turret, you are going to kill pretty much majority of the crew. It will happen every single time. There's really no way to avoid that, so it's better to just accept that and know that these Bradleys and the BMPs are paper-thin, and they're going to be very susceptible to enemy fire if they're ever fired on. Both of them also have a forward engine compartment, which does add a little bit to the frontal armor if they get hit there, but not by that much. You can also see on both of them the driver's compartment is beside the engine, so there is an inherent weak spot. If there was, say, high explosive round that hit on the upper front glacis of a Bradley right in front of the driver, it's going to kill the driver and go into the crew compartment. It will do the same thing on the BMP-2, but the engine block has a chance of stopping that on both of the APCs. As far as maneuverability goes, I believe the BMP does not beat out the Bradley, but let me make sure. Let's see, the Bradley weighs, let's see here, the weight, 27.6 tons. The BMP-2 weighs a whopping 14.3 tons, so nearly half the weight of a Bradley. The Bradley also has twice the horsepower, so I would guess that in the end they probably have about the same maneuverability. The operational range of a Bradley versus a BMP, we actually don't know that because well, actually we do. The Bradley actually has a shorter operational range than the BMP-2 and will require a top-off a lot more often. But at the same time, the maximum speed of a BMP-2 is actually identical to that of the Bradley. The Bradley and the BMP-2 both have the same top speed. So really, in almost every category, survivability and maneuverability, they're both about the same. But as far as firepower and ergonomics go, the Bradley beats the BMP-2 in every way. And also, as far as its optics go and its computer systems, it greatly beats the Bradley in every single way. So I would say that for those reasons, outside of maneuverability and firepower, well, not maneuverability and firepower, maneuverability and I forgot the other category I went with, which they're pretty much identical in, the Bradley wins in every other category. So I would say that BMP versus Bradley versus BMP-2 or BMP, this thing is going to win every single day, just for the aforementioned reasons. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, Vance, and thank you so much for the support. I hope that was the kind of in-depth answer you were looking for, pretty much a side-by-side comparison of the stat cards on the BMP and the Bradley, because they are both very common armored personnel carriers, both for Ukraine and also for, well, not for Ukraine, but for Russia and for America. And so it's a really good question, and one that a lot of people love to ask, and I think that we certainly saw that the Bradleys are way better than a BMP because nobody's seen a Ukrainian BMP destroy a main battle tank with its main gun. We did see the Bradley do that, however, and it ended up knocking out Russia's best main battle tank on the front line. But moving on from that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again for support, Vance. And with that, we are on to the next one. Also, let me see if you said anything in the live chat while I was talking about that, because that was a pretty long analysis. I don't think you said anything, and I don't see it yet. So thank you so much once again. And moving on from that, we have a 20 from Jason Carpenter. And he said, "Hi, Enforcer. We got a hell of a community here. A strong bunch of folks that believe in doing the right thing. LSA rules, bro. And I gotta agree with you. And thank you so much for the massive support, Jason. And we do have a hell of a community here. I think that there's no qualms about it. It is absolutely an amazing community through and through. And I've got to say, thank you so much for being a part of it, and thank you for enjoying it along with everyone else. It means a great deal to me that so many people come here each and every day for the community that the Lee Spring Army provides and the channel that the Enforcer is. It means a great deal to me. And I've got to say, it is truly the best community in the world, Jason. Thank you so much for the support and being another amazing part of it as well. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And let's see. And before we move on to the next one, I did see a live chat come in here, and let me make sure I read it. Inasia, that's what I'm going to call you from now on because I think that's the best I can say, said, passing out for being overly tired doesn't sound healthy. Why not backfill Matt's old job and lessen the stress? Maybe this was already addressed and I missed it. It kind of was already addressed, but I want to make sure to just quickly go over it again just in case if anyone missed it. The reason why no one's getting backfilled in Matthew's job is because it is very hard to put people in positions of authority. I've found out over 2 years of doing this and really expect the majority of them to not get, overly confident in the powers they're given. That's something that we've had a big problem with in the past, and I've learned you pretty much give up control of anything once you give anyone a moderator position or power, because people start to use that against you and threaten you with the power you gave them. For some reason, that's how it works. And I'm not saying that that's everyone, but 70% of the people we gave moderator positions to ended up turning on us over time for absolutely no reason. I don't know, maybe Daddy didn't give him enough attention. Maybe I was supposed to call them more on Discord calls and just chit-chat with them. I have no idea. But mostly it's about not having to go through the headache of having to deal with something like that again. On top of that, passing out isn't necessarily healthy, but it's what I go through each and every day to get you all the news. And I'm more than happy to do that because it means a lot to me to get the news out to y'all. I've got to thank y'all every day for being able to do this. It is truly the job I've always wanted to do, and that's why I'm totally fine with passing out from exhaustion. On top of that, life is tough. And if I want to do things in the future, like become the president of the United States, I think it's important now to show that I'll prioritize my duties over myself. That's something I think is very important to always show, especially also when you're in a position of a leader. This is not a thing that I consider myself to just be doing on the side. Like it kind of is, but it really takes equal precedent to law school. But at the same time, considering that there is right now 157,233 people who are subscribers of this channel, I feel a responsibility to each and every one of y'all as viewers to be able to put in my maximum effort. That's something that I just believe in. Some people don't get it until you get put in the shoes of thinking that there is 157,233 people that are listening to you at any given moment, any given day, and they're all counting on you. That is larger than the British Army by a factor of 2. That is larger than the German Army by a factor of 2. And when you put that into perspective, that's a lot of people. That is a huge amount of people. And that's why I feel a massive... really a massive weight over me to make sure to always run this thing even to the point of pretty much almost collapsing from exhaustion, is because there are so many people here and counting on me. People can go, like Enforcer Matt can leave and the channel can keep running. He has the luxury of knowing that that's a thing he can do if he wants to, like he ended up deciding to do. But that's not something I can do because if I decide to take days off like yesterday, the channel simply does not exist. It does not run. And so that's why I work until exhaustion. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And moving on into our next super chat. It is, and let me make sure I'm getting it in the proper order, it is a $30 Australian super chat from Margaret Hemsley. And also, she threw in 2, so I'll be addressing both of them at the same time. Margaret Hemsley said, look up Kings Park, Perth on Google Earth. When you visit, we will take you there. Also over Rottnest Island to see the cloacas. And I will make sure to do that. So let's go to Kings Park, Perth. And Western Australia, maybe? Maybe that's what it is. So let's see. It is in Perth. So let's check this place out. So this is Kings Park. Let's take a look. Beautiful place, actually. Wow, this is really beautiful. And I'm guessing that's a Anzac Memorial. It looks like it. And let's see here. Big Anzac Memorial up here on this hill. Apparently one of the most photographed things here. And it was the Great War, so it is an Anzac Memorial. But wow, this is a beautiful park. I'm not gonna lie, it's gorgeous. Just look at that. Hell, I might have to go here one day just to see this place. It is beautiful. Wow. And look, y'all even have a little metro system, or like an overground system. How cool. That is just something right there. Really, really cool. And I'm gonna have to. I am gonna have to go to Australia one day and check this place out. And let's see, Rottnest Island. Let's go to Rottnest now. So, Rottnest Island in Western Australia. So let's see what we got right here. And let's see here. So here we go. We've looked at this place before because I remember this picture and I was like, wow, this place has got like crystal clear water. And it does. It's beautiful here. Like it's literally bathtub water out of this place. Man, y'all are really lucky down there in Australia, you know, to have the places y'all have. Because it is, the whole country is like an area of natural beauty in so many different ways. I guess that's what you get when your whole country is a continent. But man, I can't find any pictures of the Clackas. But let's see here. Yeah, I can't find any pictures of them. It's like no one wants to take pictures of these things. They just want to take pictures of the beaches. But it's a beautiful place. And I'll go pull up a Clacka just because. So let me... And here we go. Ah, there we go. It's this cute little thing. These are the Clackas. And there's not Quokka. We actually got that wrong way back in the past. These things are Clackas. Right there. Aren't they cute? Aren't they cute? They are beautiful little things. I've got to say, it's like a marmot, but an Australian version of a marmot. They're so cute. They smile very sweetly. They're just a really cool little animal. And I got to thank you so much for supporting this channel and helping us to keep it running, and also letting us take a look at this beautiful Clacka. And also, thank you for letting us take a look at your home city of Perth in Western Australia. A really cool place. And also, Rottnest Island is literally right off the coast from Perth, which is a pretty big city, actually. But still, thank you so much once again for the support, Margaret, and helping the channel to keep running. And moving on to her second one, she threw in a $15 super chat and said, sending my money through Patreon from now on. YouTube doesn't need my money. And I got to thank you for the support, and thank you for wanting to support the channel primarily, not having anything go through YouTube. We do have a Patreon. This is something we don't plug a lot on air. In fact, I try not to plug it, but we do have a Patreon. The Patreon is for people who want to support the channel but don't want it to be a super chat. It's a monthly subscription system, or you can put in a one-time, like, pretty much super chat over there in a way, and it helps to support the channel. If y'all want to, you can. But one thing, however, is that I've seen that some folks will go and put down, like, a monthly subscription, and then, our support actually ends up diminishing, because instead of throwing in super chats here and there, like a $5 super chat every, week or so, they throw in like a $5 membership on Patreon, and that's for the whole month. But beyond that, that is what it is. People support how they want to support. But still, I got to thank you so much, Margaret, for the support to this channel and helping it to keep running. And also, I'll see you over on Patreon. Let me go check the Patreon real quick, because I usually try and check it daily. And let me just make sure I haven't missed anything. And let's see here. Hang on. Oh, dagnabbit, I did. It was literally 2 hours before the stream went live. I'll make sure to address that, Alan, after the stream, if you're here watching right now. But thank you to all of y'all so much once again for the support. And if y'all want to support on Patreon, the link is in the description below. That is also my answer at this point to people who say in the live chat, I want to support, but YouTube isn't letting me, and then they start getting pissed off at me for some reason, like I can run YouTube. But if you want to support the channel, just go to the Patreon, link in the description below, and that's the best way to support the channel if you can't or don't want to support it through YouTube. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you so much once again, Margaret. And with that, we are on to the next one, which is a 10 from Gary Moore. And he didn't throw in a single comment. He just threw in a 10. But thank you, Gary, for the support and helping the channel to keep running. And moving on from that, we got a 20 euro super chat from Eric Lessing. And thank you so much, Eric, for the support and helping the channel to keep running. No comment, but the support means a lot. And moving on from that, we got a $10 super chat from Bex Chitwood. And Bex said, LSA and LSA. Long live the Lee Spring Army. Can we get an LSA in the chat for the Lee Spring Army? Can we? Can we get an LSA for the best community on the entirety of the internet? I think we can. And moving on from that, but thank you once again, Bex, for the support. Siri put in a 150 Norwegian kroner and said, birds aren't real! Love to Matt. Hugs from Oslo. And then the dancing lady emoji. And thank you so much, Siri, for being one of our Norwegian viewers. For some reason, it slipped my mind, but you are a Norwegian viewer from Oslo in Norway. A beautiful city with an interesting history. And I think the most interesting thing about the city of Oslo is this little fort, the Oscarborg Fortress, which I'm sure many of y'all know about. Norwegian history. It sunk the Blucher, which was a German cruiser that was sailing into Oslo, and the cadets at this fort with the gun, let's see, I think it was the two right here, Joshua and Aaron, ended up obliterating the freaking, what was it called again? The Blucher, and ended up sinking it. Pretty cool. Well, also, sorry, it wasn't just the gun battery. It was also the hidden torpedo bay under the island. But beyond that, it's a really cool story and a really cool history. Because it scared the Germans so bad, it delayed the invasion of Oslo by, I think, a day or two. But beyond that, it's a really cool thing to talk about. I think it's a really cool city on top of that historically. And the Scandinavian countries only are known here in America for Vikings, which I feel is like a massive understatement to their history, because there's so much more to Scandinavian history than just Vikings. You know, there was the Lutheran Reformations of the 15 and 1600s. There was Gustavus Adolphus from Sweden, which was, you know, kind of bled into Norwegian history at that point. There was the interesting monarchy system, which I believe at that point was like a triple crown system at one point. It's a very interesting history that the Scandinavian countries have. And I gotta say, thank you for being one of those viewers that can share that Scandinavian history with us and say that they are from there to be able to take credit for the history, which is a really cool one, no doubt about it. But with that, I gotta thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is a 2 from CK Bold. And CK Bold said, take a live chat. And CK Bold, I cannot deny a guest even the most ridiculous request. And so I'm going to make sure to address a live chat. And it's not a ridiculous address, by the way. Let's see. The live chat here is... Let's see here. Want to see here? Let's see here. Let's see here. Yes. These writings, the chances of Poland giving the Su-22 to Ukraine, there is one Su-17 in service. So I don't know where they got it. It just showed up a couple of months ago. I don't know what else to ask. And a great question, please. A very great question indeed. Where did the Su-22 come from? Are there any others hiding in the hangars? Are there? Should we know about them? But nevertheless, the Su-22 showed up through unknown means. We don't know how it showed up either. But there is the chance that Poland is just smuggling over Su-22s, or there's some guy like the Johnny Cash song, and he's just bringing them over one piece at a time. But we don't really know. It's a big black hole as to how that Su-22 showed up to even be used. So sadly, we're as in the dark as you are on that one. I hate to say that, but still, thank you for asking a good question, and thank you for being the one to put in a live chat. And CK Bold, I hope that appeased your usual, the number one. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is a $5 super chat from Carl. And he said, hope you are well. Everyone in the LSA also. And hope you are well, Carl. I'm doing well. And let's see. And thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep running. Because folks like you help to make it possible. And so with that, we are on to the next one, which is... Oh, wait a minute. Hang on. Did I miss that one? Oh, wait a minute. Dagnabbit. Johnny Cool. I'm so sorry. I missed your $50 super chat earlier. But let me make sure to address that now so that way I don't skip over it again. I don't even know how I did that, Johnny, because I'm trying to address them from biggest super chat to smallest in that order, and I think I just missed yours completely. But Johnny Cool said, I really appreciate all that you do. My question is, do you think electronic warfare will explode in technology due to this war? And yes, I think it will, because the Ukraine war is such a large war that usually technological innovations in wars like these skyrocket rapidly. Even if there isn't a big economy behind a war like this, it will skyrocket. And I think that we've been seeing that over 2 years. Like, drone warfare went from this very interesting novelty at the start to now the Ukrainians and now the Russians are kind of catching up a little bit, are starting to use drone warfare in mass, and not expensive drones like a Reaper or a Predator or a Bayraktar. It's just those simple, small recreational drones that are starting to get used in massive amounts. And I certainly think that not just in that regard, but in anti-drone warfare and other kinds of electronic warfare, it's going to be seeing huge technological advances. We've already been seeing that just in 2 years, and I think by the time this war really does end, probably in over a year from now, we'll probably have seen the technology rapidly advanced in those categories, no doubt about it. But with that, thank you so much once again for that massive amount of support, Johnny Cool. And sorry once again for not getting to that earlier, because I'm trying to address them in order like it would have been done back in the day when Enforcer Matt was here. But sadly, for some reason, I missed that one and started off in the 20s and then went down from there. But still, thank you so much for the support. I hope that does address that well. And thank you once again for finding the channel worthwhile to support. And I hope you forgive my insolence. But moving on from that, and into a $5 super chat from Marc-Andre Brunet. Marc-Andre said, thank you for all the explanation you give us tonight about history stuff. I love it. And I consider the daily war news a great piece of history, sir. And thank you so much, Marc-Andre, for enjoying the history tidbits. I very rarely feel comfortable enough to get into rabbit holes, because rabbit holes were something that was frowned upon behind the scenes, but nowadays that is something that isn't that much of a concern, but the concern still hangs, if y'all know what I mean. But beyond that, I thank you so much for enjoying it, because I love to go into rabbit holes. Of course, my thing is being a history major, so I tried to study a lot about history, but I'll admit, like earlier, my historical facts are not always entirely accurate, because I'm trying to recall them from years ago when I learned the fact and just pull them out here on air. So they're not entirely accurate, but still hopefully interesting. And so thank you so much once again for support, Marc-Andre. And thank you for helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are moving on to a next one, which is a 5 from Tom Exman. And Tom said, boy, if everyone who says LSA would super chat every $5. And thank you for the support, Tom. And that would be cool. You know, if people did support, you know, the channel. But at the same time, I never want to try and force people to do that. The channel is entirely run for free. There's not an ad, there's not a sponsor. No one has to watch an ad or a sponsor to get on this channel and watch it. It is just the news. People can support it if they want to, and they don't have to if they don't want to. But, however, while it is completely optional, I will say the channel does run completely on support. It is not free to live. I do not live in this magic socialist or communist utopia where people can just live for free. That's a world that I'll never be able to exist in, because it just simply is not a possibility. So I do have to make sure to pay bills behind the scenes. So support is very important on that end. But beyond that, it is an entirely free show to watch. If people did support the channel a lot more, I would be very happy with that. I could never complain about that. But at the same time, I never want people to feel like they have to be compelled to support the channel. It is entirely up to them. And I always want it to be an optional thing and something that doesn't feel like it's being forced on the community. But still, thank you for the support, Tom Exman, and helping the channel to keep on running. And we are moving on to the next one, which is a $2 super chat from Wyatt Logan. And Wyatt said, thank you for the hard work. And thank you, Wyatt, for supporting this channel so that way I can keep up the hard work and keep this channel rolling. And moving on from that, we got a 5 from Robert Johnson, who didn't throw in a comment, but he did throw in support, and that means a lot and helps me to keep this thing rolling. And so thank you so much once again, and I hope that does address that well. And of course, folks like you make this channel possible. And moving on from that, we got a $20 super chat from Tommy Two Tokes, and he said, keep it up, Enforcer. Take a chat, LSA, F around, find out, Slava Ukraini. And thank you so much, Tommy Two Tokes, for wanting me to keep it up. Thank you so much once again for support as well, and helping me to keep it up. And thank you so much for sponsoring a live chat. And let's see. And let's see here. Also, really quickly to address this one, this isn't going to count as the live chat, but Panama Flay said, Dr. Strangelove, Peter Sellers' voice? If so, old Cold War kid over here digs it. Yes, that was literally the voice I was going for. I was going for, this is the only solution, that's we have a sick, you know, and he did like all that stuff, and he was like having to pull his arm down. That was the voice I was going for, but let's see here. Let's see here. I'm trying to find a good live chat. Let's see here. Trying to find it. There isn't a lot of them coming in, as a matter of fact. And also, oh, well, here we go. Finally, we got one. THRL, and also Christian, hold that for a little bit longer. Throw that in the live chat segment again, because I'll make sure to go check it out during the live chat segment. But THRL said, what do you think the 20 Days of Mariupol movie will get the attention it deserves at the Oscar? Maybe so. I would hope it would. But you never know, because things like the Oscars and the Emmys, I never really put a lot of faith in them. In fact, I don't really put a lot of faith in any awarding organization much. So I'm always pleasantly surprised when they do something I'm happy with. But I wouldn't really expect anything out of it, because I'm sure they're going to pick some stupid movie like, you know, Farting at the Moon, you know, some movie that nobody ever watched, but for some reason it wins an Oscar. You know, you never know. But still, you know, I wouldn't hold my breath, but it still would be nice to see. That I will admit. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And thank you so much once again for the support and sponsoring that live chat, Tommy Two Tokes. And moving on to our last super chat. And by the way, y'all start throwing in the live chats here, because this is when I will be able to get a all the live chats, hopefully as many as I possibly can. But Opus threw in a 65 Swedish kroner. Adding on to that Scandinavian country group, Norway and Sweden have been here tonight, both through Siri and Opus. And Opus threw in a 65 Swedish kroner, and he said, LSA, and LSA to you, Opus. And long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die. And of course, the Enforcer protects. But still, thank you so much once again for helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on into that live chat segment. We got a lot to cover in this live chat segment. There's plenty to cover, a lot to talk about, many things to talk about, unbelievable things to talk about. What could we talk about? All kinds of stuff. And we're going to move on first to Christian Cruz, who said, please look up the Anzac Memorial in Gallipoli. Read the text that Ataturk wrote to the Anzacs. That is how a president behaves. And we will go to Gallipoli, right down here at the very bottom of this little peninsula right here. And I've got to go find the monument. Let's see if that's it. That is not it. Let's go down here. Let's see here. This is the Turkish monument to Gallipoli. Let's see here. Will I be dipped? Let's see, here's another monument that Turkey made. That's interesting, you know, when you think about it. Turkey actually has a lot of monuments dedicated to the Ottoman resistance at Gallipoli, although Ataturk tore down the concept of the Ottoman Empire and pretty much made Turkey a brand new nation, which had literally nothing to do with the Ottomans. But let's see here. The Anzac Cove, Turkey. Oh, what the hell was I doing all the way down there? Let's see here if I can find it here. I have a feeling that this is one of them. Oh, here we go. So, those heroes that shed their blood and lost their lives, you are now living in the soul of a friend country, therefore rest in peace. There is no difference between the Johnnies and the Mehmets to us, where they lie side by side here in this country of ours. You, the mothers who sent their sons from faraway countries, wipe away your tears. Your sons are now living in our bosom and are in peace. After having lost their lives on this land, they have become our sons as well. Ataturk, 1934. That was not that long before he died, actually, which is very interesting. But beyond that, very, very good words right there. And I gotta say, that's also very shocking, especially coming from Ataturk, which, if y'all did not know, he was actually a I think, a junior officer during the Battle of Gallipoli and actually fought against the Anzacs himself. So they have that kind of respect, and to revere an enemy nation's soldiers like that is something very honorable for sure, and something that many people, even myself, don't even do against the Russians in the current war. I gotta say, that's pretty impressive from Ataturk, and I never even knew that he said anything like that. And I have studied Christian, like Turkish history, Ottoman history too, and I didn't even know he said that. That is actually something. And thank you for teaching me some tonight about Ataturk that I didn't even know. Very interesting indeed. And thank you once again for support and helping the channel to keep on running. But with that, we must move on to the next one, and hopefully we'll have more live chats. And let's see, the next one goes to Richard Gurr, who threw in a $20 super chat. And he said, keep it going, Enforcer. I like the super chats, but may start sending donations to Patreon, as Margaret Hemsley suggested. And then he put a little questioning face. And if you want to, you can. I don't know if I'd be able to read those off on stream as super chats, but I may start to recognize y'all daily if y'all send support over Patreon like a super chat. I'll make sure to recognize y'all on air. And if y'all want to throw in like a DM or something on Patreon too, y'all could do that. And maybe I could address them like super chats that way. But still, thank you for the support, Richard, and thank you for liking the super chats. Because like I've always said, I've always wanted the channel to run as transparently as possible. And one of the best ways that I've been able to ensure that is by doing super chats. Like, if y'all can't see right now, up at the very top of the live chat, y'all can see the super chats that are still here. And if you go back and ever watch a stream replay, you can see the live chat in live time, even weeks and months after the stream's over, and it'll also show all the super chats coming in. It's a very public way of showing where the support comes from and even how much we get. It kind of dispels the stupid lies out there, like some people who say that the Enforcer channel has made over $1 million on super chats. You can literally just watch every single night how many super chats we get, how much that is, and then take YouTube's 30% out and get the exact total that we've made over 2 years. It's not like it's some kind of a damn secret or anything. It's literally public. So that's something that I like about super chats that a lot of other channels don't do, you know, like the ones who, you know, run ads and sponsors. And I know how much a video makes when you have an ad or a sponsor. Like when you get a sponsorship, what's crazy is that you can make $1,000 off of 50,000 views. So if you have a 100,000 view video, you've made $2,000 on that video. Just to put out the metric there for y'all. So if you ever see a channel that has a sponsorship and their video gets like, say, 500,000 views, they're making like $20,000. Well, let me think. Hang on. That's not a correct translation. They're making like $8,000, I would believe, if I'm doing the math correctly in my head. And if they're running ads on that video, oh, buddy, wow, they're really on the gravy train. They are making, with a sponsor and ads on, they'll be making like $10,000 on a single 500,000 view video. So, you know, just putting that into perspective, there's a lot of other people out there on the gravy train, a lot more than this channel has ever been, because we don't run ads and we don't have sponsors and we just run through super chats. And just by and large, no matter how many people actually support the channel, super chats are probably never going to compare it to sponsorships and ads. They just won't. But that's still fine with me, because I just want to run the channel, you know, make a living doing it and cover the news. I'm not here to hop on a gravy train, you know, just try and make a killing or anything like that. And so still, I thank you for the support, and hopefully, you know, people may start doing that if they can't support through super chat for one reason or another. But thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep running, because folks like you make it possible. And if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to keep this thing running. And oh, by the way, another thing that is really, really funny to me, there's one person out there in particular, y'all may know him, he's the spawn of the devil, and apparently he's such a terrible person that both his real parents and his adopted parents abandoned him. But beyond that, what's interesting to me is that for one moment, a while ago, months ago, because, you know, the guy said crap about us, some said, oh, he said crap about you. Also, of course, we had to go see what the guy said. So when he was talking about us, he flipped accidentally onto his analytics tab on his YouTube control room, and it showed the income that the guy made. With 60,000 subscribers, he was making like $8,500 a month. So I was like, huh, that's a little interesting, because we don't even make that much ever. Like, I was like, that's a little shocking. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, because it's always something that is funny to me, because we got to support ourselves. We got to run the thing. We don't, well, I got to support myself. I got to run the thing at this point. It's not we anymore. It's just me. But, and I've never tried to hide that from people. I always try and be as transparent as possible. And then someone raking in almost 5 digits a month wants to say we're war profiteering because we don't run ads and don't have sponsors. That's always weird to me how that works. It's always the people who are actually profiteering that want to point the fingers at other people. It's like James Vasquez, who was calling people cowards and stuff and never fought a day on the front lines ever in Ukraine. But with that, I hope that does address that quite well. And thank you so much once again for the support, Richard, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, I hope that does address that quite well. But it's time for us to move on into some live chats. And let's see here. We have... a live chat from Jason Carpenter, who said, do you think the Russians will be dumb enough to try an offensive in the northeast of the country again? They have tried already, and they have failed. We called it the, not the Ilovaisk, the Vilshana and Sinkivka offensive, but it ended up being a failure because they've never even taken the ground. And it's been months that's been going on. It's just a very quiet offensive. Moving on from that, Philip Fixes LSA says, what does the Ukrainian offensive look like now with reduced support and a stagnant line? Also poll for second permanent day off. Bet you 80% for more rest. Philip, sadly, I never let viewers tell me like my hours. Like if I did that, everyone would be like, oh, take 3 days off. But the thing is that it's not just that, it's about the algorithm. While viewers may be happy with me taking days off, and I bet you're right on that, YouTube would not be happy with me taking days off. We're already bumped in the algorithm as it is because we cover the war. If I took another day off and I made my schedule a little bit more inconsistent, YouTube will push this stream a lot less. The viewership will dry up very quickly, and then I will be left with nothing as far as viewership goes. And so I have to kind of keep up this very grueling schedule, or otherwise I won't have anything to actually I won't have anyone to actually talk to. There will hardly be anyone here that's left. But let's see, I think a Ukrainian offensive in the future is probably going to be pretty small. It's probably going to have to be something like the Balaklia offensive, where we saw that it didn't really take a lot of artillery. It was just really good planning and a quick breakthrough, and then exploitation of the breakthrough that will lead to the results that they're looking for. And so with that, I hope that does address that well, at least in my opinion. And moving on from that, let's see. And let's see here. Good night, Siri, and thank you so much for saying you're proud of me. I'm proud of y'all. And You're Taking My Life said, I don't understand people who run ads during their live stream broadcasts. I don't think that should even be an available option. It makes the context hard to follow. Yeah, I don't really like that either. It's not my thing, though. I want to say this. It's not my thing to tell other channels how to run, but whenever channels throw stones at me, and I see that it's just stupid to do that, I'm like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, one person in particular that came after us, having known nothing of the facts way back in October, and I'm sure many of y'all remember everything that went on, the whole firestorm and the whole community over everything that happened back then. They said that we don't really seem to be doing it for Ukraine. We seem to be doing it for money. And I found that really weird because they run nothing but videos that are 12 minutes long with ads and sponsors. Their entire channel before that was focused on finances and talking about how to make the most out of your portfolio. And the first video they ever made on Ukraine said, oh no, the war in Ukraine started. How's this going to affect my stock portfolio? So instead of actually caring about the war back then, because there were a lot of lives at stake and there would be a strategic impact to the Western world, they only cared about the war because it may affect their portfolio and their earnings and income at the end of the day. And then when they figured out that riding the train of being a social, like a virtue signaler on Ukraine, and that would make them a killing of money, then they switched to making videos like that. And going off of the math I gave y'all, they're probably making, I don't know, with a sponsor and ads, just saying ads alone, they're making at least over $1,000 a day. And then with a sponsor, they're making much more than that a day. And then they wanted to say that we're doing it for the money. And I was like, that's a little odd, because we make a lot less in a month than you do in a week. You know, and that's one thing that's always like that's one thing that really pissed me off when people started attacking us about that, because it's like everyone in the community, even smaller channels, makes a lot more than we do because we don't run ads and have sponsors. But because we do our support publicly through super chats, they want to act like, oh, look, they're just raking it in when they know we're not. It's like, that's just stupid, you know. And that, I'll be honest with y'all, that still does piss me off, because it's like, oh, so I guess we're supposed to be shady like everyone else and not publicize our support and not thank individual viewers for their support. We should just quietly take in tens of thousands of dollars a week like everyone else does, and then not thank anyone for it and act like we're making nothing off of it. And then, you know, go on these exorbitant vacations, you know, and everything else. And, you know, just, it just really sickens me. But anyways, with that, I hope that does address that well, because that's something that has aggravated me for a while. But and that's why I don't like running ads during streams. I don't like running ads on anything. And the only reason we run ads on our videos is because I tried not to for a long time. I tried to make the videos completely free like the streams, but when I did that, YouTube would never push them. They would get like 15,000 views and 20,000 views. And then when I turned ads on, voila, they're getting like 80,000 and 100,000 views at a bare minimum. And like, that was, you know, one thing that just, I was like, that's just sad. You know, like, I have to run an ad to get the videos promoted. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one, which is a 10 from Irish Ed. Hey! And LSA, Irish Ed here from Pennsylvania. Here, question, WWPD, what would Patton do during the Ukraine summer offensive? Probably, that's a good question. I wouldn't really be able to tell you what Patton would do, because, to be quite honest, I haven't really studied Patton's tactics in the field that much. It's just something I never did. I don't know why. But still, thank you for the support, Irish Ed. And sadly, I'd have to declare ignorance on that at the moment, because I don't understand the general well enough to be able to tell you what he would have done. I would tell you what Arnold Schwarzkopf would have done, because I studied what Arnold Schwarzkopf did greatly, because I'm a huge admirer of Schwarzkopf. I mean, Schwarzkopf was amazing, truly incredible, a general, both an inspiring leader to his men and also a great strategist and a brilliant mind, probably one of the best that was had in the entire 20th century. But Patton, on the other hand, the reason why I didn't really study him that much is because while he was a pretty decent strategist, in my opinion, he wasn't that great of a general. Like, some people are going to say, oh, you know, he only slapped 2 shell-shocked soldiers, but, like, he honestly beat the guys, you know, like, that's not being a good general, you know, especially by that point in history when shell shock was a very well understood phenomenon, and to then beat soldiers who were shell shocked and just pretend like it's cowardice, I feel like that's very unfeeling as a commander and didn't really do a lot to really ingratiate himself with the public, which is a big part of being a general, and also ingratiate himself with the soldiers of North Africa. On top of that, his speech that he gave before the landings in Sicily was what led to the Biscari massacre, which was probably one of the worst massacres that U.S. forces ever conducted in Europe. And largely from what was found out after the massacre happened and later reports way down the line, because it was kind of covered up, they found out that the soldiers did it because Patton told them to have no mercy and to kill any bastard that stood in their way, including the ones that surrendered. And so they ended up killing 70 Italian and German prisoners just by hosing them down with Tommy guns. I mean, you know, like I have to say this. I get executing prisoners here and there. Like if you're an airborne unit that landed in Cannes or anywhere else in the area, like San Mariglis, and you end up capturing 1 or 2 Germans and there's no way for you to take care of them. Executing a prisoner then, and only under those very rare circumstances, is acceptable. But when you're literally in the army advancing across Sicily and southern Italy, and there is a place to process these prisoners, and you end up gunning down 70 of them because you were inspired by merciless speech from your general, it doesn't really do a lot, honestly, in my opinion, in the modern day, to make him sound like he was that great of a general. You know, that's just like, that's my opinion. A lot of people adore Patton. Honestly, I think he was a great strategist, no doubt about it. But in his actual countenance as a general, I feel like it wasn't done with really any grace at all. It was a little bit too dogged. And you know, that would be my opinion, but that's just my personal opinion. But beyond that, thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does address that the best I can. And let's see. And moving on from that, it's time for us to get back to the live chats. And let's see here. Let's see. We got some live chats, and our next one is from. Let's see here. Who's it from? I gotta find it. 420, who said, God bless, and God bless to you. And Margaret Hemsley said, just join Patreon. Come on, lads and lasses, why not join the elite of the LSA? And thank you for joining Patreon, Margaret, and I hope you enjoy it over there. And Jason Carpenter said, I hang out here because you're not that kind of channel. And thank you, Jason, for enjoying that. I try my best to make sure that we do as little as possible to profit off the war, and we just do the bare minimum to make a living and continue to be able to do it. And so Tom Exman said, "Got to find out how to give on it when stream is over. Got the Enforcer site up there now." And thank you for that. And I hope you do join the Patreon. Let me see if I've got any new pop-ups, because I should, and I do. And it is Margaret Hemsley. And welcome on board, Margaret. Welcome on board. And I hope you enjoyed here. It's a great place, Patreon is. Sadly, I haven't been able to upload on it much, though. And I don't want anyone to be under a misconception that there's a lot of uploading going on over there. Because, sadly, once again, things have gotten so busy, it's really hard just to run the streams themselves and anything extra. And moving on from that, we have a $2, well, a 20 Swedish kroner super chat from Quantum Fighter that says, I owe you. And oh, thank you, Quantum Fighter, for the support and helping the channel to roll. And let's see here. And thank you so much once again for support. And let's see, I think I'm going to be addressing the last question of the night because I'm not really seeing a lot of live chats coming in. And Tom Exman said, aren't I listed yet? Let me check. Let's see. You're not popping up on my end yet. Oh, wait. You are popping up as a free member of the Lee Spring Army. And welcome on board. You joined. And welcome on. But with that, I hope that does address that well. And let's see here. And Panama Floyd said, strategy does not equal tactics. Anybody my age who played those old Avalon Hill tabletop war games should understand that. And that is true. Strategy does not equal tactics. I very rarely use the word tactics because tactics is the stupidest, like, it is the most overused word. It's become stupid because of its overuse. So many people overuse that word and don't understand what it means. Like, people will go, let's talk about the tactics of the Soviet Union in World War II. No, it's not tactics. It's strategy of the Soviet Union in World War II. It's an overview. It's a large umbrella of a big picture. There's no tactics in driving a truck to a soldier. That's part of a grand strategy of logistics. On top of that, tactics really fall as a minutia of a grand strategy, and it's really how that grand strategy is carried out on a small unit level. That's what tactics are. And so whenever I hear people using tactic, it just drives me crazy. And then also there's tactical this, tactical that. Everything is tactical these days. Like, you can get a uniform, like a combat uniform, and it's now, instead of just a combat uniform, it's a tactical combat uniform. And the word just adds nothing but fluff to what it is. It's a combat uniform. It's a knife. It's a fighting knife. Now it's a tactical combat knife. Like, I find that ridiculous. And, like, you know, I hate when things are just called tactical. It's like, it's a flashlight. You know, it's not a tactical flashlight. It's a flashlight. Because guess what? The tactical flashlight and the normal flashlight both project light. And both of them are honestly well built. So, you know, it's a flashlight. It's not a tactical flashlight. And it just annoys me. But anyways, moving on to the last live chat. Let's see here. The last live chat. And you're taking my life. I think this is a good one to end on. This is the final, this is the lucky last question of the lucky last, well, who threw in the lucky last question? I don't even know how in the world I used to do that. I'm so sorry, everyone. But anyways, the final question tonight goes to You're Taking My Life, who said, I love it here because there's no political BS being blamed on this one and that one. Everyone just wants to help Ukraine. And thank you so much for that. And it's a great way to end our time on this channel tonight is by talking about that. I got to tell y'all, So many people out there get into politics. Of course, many of y'all I know are hearing about politics right now. It seems like there's a little bit of an issue going on near the southern border of the United States that is really drawing in a lot of political discussion and honestly a lot of fears about the future of this nation because the situation is starting to get very tense in the eyes of the public. Beyond that, however, I think it's great to know that we do not talk about politics here. I think that's wonderful. Politics is something that is very divisive, and honestly divisive over superficial things. Very stupid and ignorant people have decided to weaponize politics to try and pull this nation apart. And to be quite honest with y'all, I think both sides do it equally, and one side is supported by the Chinese, and the other one supported by the Russians. And what's funny is that neither of them realize it, and they're continuing to just further the interests of our adversaries abroad and tear this nation apart from within. I'm glad that nobody gets into politics in here, and everyone is just more so into the general understanding that we should support Ukraine and that anything that the United States does abroad should be furthering the interests of this Western world and improving the standing of everyone here in the Western world and also in America at the end of the day, regardless of their affiliations and regardless of their small squabbles domestically. That is something that really divides this channel from the rest. And I think that's something that certainly needs to become a prevailing mindset in the United States and around the world again, is that the enemies aren't your neighbors. The enemies are the nations abroad that are working to try and tear this country apart from the inside, and they're telling everyone lies and trying to get them to rip each other apart instead of ripping them apart. That's something that is absolutely incredible in this community. And I got to thank every single one of y'all, not only for enjoying it, but tonight I saw so many of y'all enforcing it and talking all kinds of amazing stuff about, how politics is not tolerated here and, everything else. I think it's truly incredible. And I got to thank every one of y'all for being a part of that and just making this channel as special as it is. It's incredible. I love to know that this community is the only one on YouTube, really, at this point in the Ukraine war sector that does not talk about politics. I was wandering around all the channels the other day, literally yesterday, because I was bored at law school. But I was wandering around, and everybody has decided that they are the most important person on the world to tell you about politics. And none of them are helping the situation, and all of them are just helping to inflame the public and get them even more angry over things that you honestly could stay pretty civil about and not really make a big issue about it. It's crazy to me as well how many people will sit there idly by and let the Houthis do things to the United States, let Hamas and really any other group do stuff to the United States, let Russia and China do anything they want to the United States, and they'll roll over, both sides will at this point, in different ways, and they'll let them do whatever they want to America. But at the same time, they'll froth at the mouth and dream and wish about the day that they'll be able to kill the people in America that disagree with them. And that's both sides. Don't, and nobody in this chat better sit there and say, oh, that's the left or the right. No, I see that from both sides now. Both sides are wishing that they could kill each other at this point. And I think that's absolutely sad that both sides will sit there and wish that the Chinese will tear down America or Russia will tear down America just so that way they can get at the other person that lives right next door to them. It's sad. It's pitiful. It's a terrible state for this nation to be in, that so many people have forgotten that the reason why this republic was so great is because people didn't sit there and fight each other here in America. We fought the other people overseas that were trying to tear this country down in our sphere of influence that we built around the world. And whether people agree or disagree with it, it is the best sphere of influence that can ever be seen. Have you seen one better? Would you say that living in China or Russia is a better fate than living in a Western world, even if you agree or disagree with every law that's passed or every decision that's made? I don't think anyone could ever say that with a straight face, and if they did, they would have to be delusional and have to eaten up all the propaganda that you could have ever heard around the world. And I think it is amazing. It truly the best thing ever that the Lee Spring Army is a non-political organization that does not take a side, either to the left or the right, and goes straight down the middle for American interest only, supporting the Republic, supporting the Western world, and also making sure to quash our adversaries, such as the Russians and the Chinese and any of their cronies, wherever they may be around the world. And with that note, I think it is a great time to end. But before we do, I have to thank Carl for the $2 super chat. And he said, Marmot? And yes, we will have a Marmot. We will have one Marmot moment before we go. And so let me go grab the Marmot. And, oh, hello there. And it's Marmot time. Right after that very deep speech that I made. And I got to thank you so much for your support, Carl, in throwing in a little bit of a Marmot. Because folks like you helped make this channel possible and helped me to have a Marmot time. But with that, thank you all so much once again for watching and helping this channel to keep on running tonight. Thank you for hitting the like button as well. We've gotten up to an incredibly high number of likes, and it's an absolute honor to be able to run this stream for y'all each and every night. Of course, y'all will be able to count on me being here at 10 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine as we prepare for a Sunday night fundraiser. Thank you all so much once again for watching. Thank you all once again for being a part of the Lee Spring Army. Good night. Good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
Yes. The Lee Spring Army sends its regards.
Русский военный корабль. Предлагаю сложить оружие и сдаться. Русский военный корабль, иди нахуй.